The wife who vanished. When a crime boss lost the only thing he couldn't control. At 4 a.m., Adrian Voss walked into his penthouse and found the one thing his money couldn't buy back: silence. His wife was gone. Not kidnapped, not killed, just gone. The woman who'd stood beside him through blood and betrayal had walked away without a word, leaving only divorce papers and empty closets. For a man who controlled an empire, this quiet exit cut deeper than any bullet. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches. The elevator doors opened with their usual whisper, that soft mechanical sigh Adrian Voss had heard 1,000 times before. He stepped into the marble foyer of his penthouse, shoulders loose, tie already pulled free and hanging around his neck like a question mark. The city sprawled 43 floors below, its lights bleeding into the pre-dawn darkness like wounds that never quite healed. 4 in the morning, the hour when most people slept, when the world pretended at peace. Adrian did his best work in these hours. The meetings that couldn't happen in daylight, the decisions that required darkness to justify them. Tonight had been productive. 3 shipments rerouted, 2 rivals convinced to see reason, 1 problem permanently solved. He'd left Marcus to handle the cleanup. Marcus was good at cleanup. Adrian's reflection caught in the floor-to-ceiling windows. Tall frame, expensive suit, wrinkled in all the places that suggested a long night, dark hair showing gray at the temples that his barber kept suggesting he dye. He was 42 and looked every year he'd spent building what he'd built. He didn't mind. Age meant survival in his line of work, and survival was the only currency that mattered. The penthouse spread before him in shadows and ambient light from the city below. Everything in its place, everything controlled. He'd bought this place 8 years ago, paid cash, put it in Lillian's name because that's what you did when you loved someone in his world. You gave them things they could keep if everything went wrong. Insurance against the life he'd chosen. Lillian. He expected to find her asleep in their bed or awake with one of her books, reading until her eyes burned because she'd never learned to stop when she should. Expected the smell of her tea, that chamomile blend she drank at night. Expected her questions about where he'd been, asked in that careful way she'd perfected, concerned but not demanding, present but not intrusive. He expected routine. The silence hit him first. Not the absence of sound, cities never went truly quiet, but the absence of presence. The quality of air in a space when you're alone versus when you're not. He'd learned to read these things young, back when survival meant knowing whether you were walking into an empty room or an ambush. Lil? His voice fell flat in the stillness. The living room looked wrong. It took him a moment to place why. Everything was there. The cream sofa she'd chosen, the abstract paintings she'd bought at galleries he found pretentious, the coffee table books she actually read. But something was missing. Several somethings. The cashmere throw she kept folded over the sofa arm. The small bronze sculpture she'd bought in Prague, the one that looked like a woman dancing or drowning depending on the light. Her reading glasses, usually abandoned on whatever surface she'd last used. Adrian's pulse kicked up, that old instinct firing. His hand moved automatically toward the gun in his shoulder holster. He moved through the living room like he moved through hostile territory. Quiet, aware, ready. The kitchen was immaculate, too immaculate. Lillian cooked sometimes, left evidence. A cutting board not quite dry, a dish towel draped over the oven handle. Her herb garden by the window needing water. Now the counters were bare. The herbs were gone. No coffee cup in the sink from her late-night habits. His chest tightened. He moved faster now, through the dining room they never used, past the guest rooms that stayed empty, toward the master bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was open. That was wrong, too. Lillian always closed it when she slept, said she couldn't rest with doors hanging open like waiting mouths. The bed was made with hospital corners, every pillow in place, made the way it looked when the cleaning service came, not the way Lillian made it, which was quick and careless, a concession to order she didn't particularly care about. Adrian stood in the doorway and made himself look at what he already knew. Her closet door stood open. He could see inside, the empty hangers, the vacant shelves, the shoe racks that held nothing but possibility. His clothes hung undisturbed on his side, $3,000 suits crammed beside jeans he never wore. Her side was a skeleton, picked clean. The bathroom told the same story. His toiletries lined the counter, But the space where her things had lived, the specific creams and serums she used, the perfume bottles, the hair products that cost more than most people's rent, was wiped clean. Even the towels looked wrong, one set instead of two, like the absence had teeth. He walked back to the bedroom on legs that felt borrowed, sat down on the bed that didn't smell like her anymore. That's when he saw it. An envelope on her pillow, his name written in her handwriting. Not Adrian or Honey or any of the things she might have called him, just AV. His initials, formal as a business letter. His hand shook when he picked it up. Adrian Voss, who'd put guns to men's heads without trembling, who'd stared down federal prosecutors and dirty cops and rivals who wanted him dead. His hand shook, holding a piece of paper. He opened it. The note was brief. So brief it felt like a slap. Adrian, I've filed for divorce. My attorney will contact yours. I've taken only what's mine and left everything that's yours. Don't look for me. I don't want to be found. Take care of yourself. L. No explanation, no emotion, no rage or tears or accusations, just facts, delivered clean as a coroner's report. She'd signed it with her initial, the same formality he'd gotten on the envelope. Like they were strangers. Like 8 years of marriage could be summarized in 6 sentences and a dash. Adrian read it 3 times, looking for something he'd missed, some hidden message or clue. There was nothing. The paper was quality stock, expensive but not personal. She could have been writing to anyone. He sat there as the sky outside began to lighten, holding the note, trying to remember when he'd last really looked at her. Really looked. Not just seen in passing. Tried to remember the last conversation they'd had that wasn't logistics. What time he'd be home, whether they needed anything from the store, small talk that filled the space where connection used to be. Couldn't do it. Couldn't pin down a specific moment. The memories blurred together into a sequence of scenes where she was present but increasingly distant, there but not there, smiling but not happy. He'd noticed it the way you notice weather, something happening outside yourself that didn't require action. When had that started? When had she stopped asking where he went at night? When had she stopped waiting up, stopped caring about the blood on his shirts, or the names he didn't say? He'd been grateful for it at the time, grateful she'd finally learned not to push, not to demand things he couldn't give. Now her silence felt like a countdown he'd been too stupid to hear. His phone buzzed. Marcus. "It's done," Marcus said when Adrian answered. No greeting, just confirmation. "Good." Adrian's voice sounded like someone else's, hollow and distant. "You all right, boss? You sound—" "I'm fine. Go home." He hung up before Marcus could respond, stared at the phone in his hand. 37 missed calls over the past week, he realized. Only 3 from Lillian. The rest were business. Marcus, his attorney, his accountant, the various people who needed things from him. When had he last called her back? When had he last initiated contact? The phone buzzed again, a text this time from a number he'd saved under M. "Last night was fun. When can I see you again?" Monica. The cocktail waitress from the casino he'd been seeing for 3 months, 26, blonde, uncomplicated. She laughed at his jokes and didn't ask questions and looked at him like he was something special instead of something dangerous. She was easy where Lillian had become difficult, present where Lillian had grown distant. She was also the reason he'd been coming home later and later, making excuses that got thinner every time. Adrian stared at the text until the screen went dark, his face reflecting back at him in the black glass. He looked older than he had an hour ago. Looked like someone who'd just discovered he'd been robbed but couldn't identify what was missing until it was too late. He called his attorney, Henry Marsh, 63 years old, expensive as cancer, and twice as persistent. The phone rang 4 times before a sleep-rough voice answered. "This better be good, Adrian. Do you know what time it is?" "Lillian's gone." A pause. "Gone how? Do you need—" "Divorce. She left a note. Says her attorney will contact you." Another pause, longer this time. Adrian heard the rustle of sheets, imagined Henry sitting up in his bed, his wife stirring beside him, the domestic scene Adrian had thought he had, but apparently didn't. "When did this happen?" "I don't know. I just got home. Everything's gone. Her clothes, her things. I didn't know she was planning this." "Have you tried calling her?" Adrian hadn't. He did now. Henry still on the line. It rang once before going to voicemail, her voice bright and professional. "You've reached Lillian Hart. Please leave a message." Hart. Her maiden name. She'd never taken his, said she wanted to keep something of herself separate from his world. He'd admired that once, her independence. Now it felt like prophecy. Voicemail, he told Henry. Goes straight there. Probably blocked you. Adrian, I need you to think carefully. Has she been acting differently? Any arguments? Any indication this was coming? Had there been? Adrian tried to inventory the last few months, but they blurred together. Business trips, late meetings, the nights with Monica that had turned into mornings, the lies he'd told himself were victimless because Lillian didn't ask and therefore didn't care. We'd grown apart, he said finally, but I didn't know she was this unhappy. They rarely advertise it. Henry's voice held something Adrian didn't like, something knowing. Listen, this is going to get complicated. She's smart to have moved out first, possession being 9/10 and all that. Where are you now? The penthouse. Stay there. Don't touch anything. Don't throw anything away, especially that note. I'll need to see it. And Adrian, don't try to find her. If she says she doesn't want to be found, respect that. Anything else will only make this worse. This is my wife, Henry. This is a woman who's made a calculated decision to leave you, which means she's been planning it long enough to have her ducks in a row. You go looking for her now, it won't end the way you want it to. Trust me on this. Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to say Henry didn't understand, but the truth was, Henry probably understood better than he did. Henry had been married 3 times, divorced twice, knew the terrain of failed marriages like a general knew battlefield maps. I'll call you tomorrow, Henry said. Get some sleep if you can. Sleep. Adrian almost laughed. He hung up, stood in the bedroom that was now just his, tried to imagine sleeping in that bed alone. Couldn't picture it. He walked through the penthouse again, slower this time, cataloging what was missing. It was subtle, the way she'd extracted herself. She'd left the furniture, the art, everything that was jointly theirs. Taken only the personal things, her clothes, her books, the small objects she'd collected over the years. The bronze dancer from Prague, the set of vintage teacups she'd inherited from her grandmother, the photographs that stopped him. The photographs were gone, every single one. The wedding photos that had lined the hallway, the candid shots from trips they'd taken before everything got complicated, the images of her family she'd kept on her nightstand. All removed, the walls and surfaces left with neat rectangular patches of unfaded paint where frames had hung. She'd erased herself. Methodically, completely, like she'd never been there at all. Adrian poured himself a drink, scotch, 30 years old, the kind of expensive that was supposed to mean something. It tasted like ashes. He carried it to the window and stood there as the sun broke over the city, painting everything gold and pink, the colors of false hope. His phone rang. Marcus again. I said go home, Adrian answered. Can't, we've got a problem. What kind of problem? The kind that needs you to come down to the warehouse. Now. Adrian closed his eyes, felt the weight of the world he'd built pressing down. This was his life. Problems at dawn, fires that needed putting out, crises that couldn't wait. The kind of life that had slowly, inexorably pushed Lillian away until she'd rather have nothing than have this. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up, drained the scotch, got his second wind the way he always did when the world demanded it. Compartmentalize. Focus. Deal with what you can control and ignore what you can't. It was the skill that had made him successful, made him feared, made him powerful, made him alone. Before he left, Adrian went back to the bedroom one more time, picked up Lillian's note from where he'd left it on the bed. Read it again, looking for something he kept missing. Don't look for me. I don't want to be found. But he would look. Of course he would. Because Adrian Voss didn't accept defeat, didn't take no for an answer, didn't let things he owned just walk away. That was the thought that carried him out of the penthouse and down to the garage where his car waited, black and sleek and expensive as murder. That was the thought that got him through the next 24 hours of business and crisis and the 1,000 small violences that made up his days. It would be 3 weeks before he understood what that note really meant. 3 weeks before he realized that Lillian wasn't something he owned, but someone he'd lost. 3 weeks before the word divorce became less abstract and more permanent, before Henry called with news of papers filed and assets divided, and a wife who was no longer his wife. 3 weeks before, he understood that some things, once broken, couldn't be fixed with power or money or will. But that morning, driving toward the warehouse, and whatever problem waited there, Adrian Voss still believed he could get her back. Still believed this was temporary, a tantrum, a phase. Still believed that Lillian, like everything else in his world, would eventually bend to what he wanted. He was wrong. But he wouldn't know that until much later, until the damage was complete and the price fully paid. For now, he had problems to solve, fires to put out, an empire to run. For now, he could pretend that the hollow feeling in his chest was just lack of sleep, that the silence in the penthouse was just circumstance, that the note in his pocket wasn't the sound of a door closing forever. For now, he could still pretend he hadn't already lost. The warehouse was in Red Hook, a sprawling concrete structure that officially belonged to a shipping company Adrian owned 3 shell corporations removed. The sun was fully up by the time he arrived, harsh morning light turning the industrial waterfront into a study in gray and rust and neglected ambition. Marcus met him at the entrance, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the 6 hours since they'd last spoken. That was never a good sign. "Show me," Adrian said, not bothering with pleasantries. Marcus led him through the warehouse floor, past legitimate cargo and less legitimate cargo, to the office section in the back. The whole way, workers gave them space, eyes down, hands busy. Everyone knew when the boss came in at dawn, it meant blood in the water. The problem was waiting in what they called the conference room, a windowless space with concrete walls and a metal table that had seen more interrogations than negotiations. 2 men were already there. One was Ray Santos, Adrian's enforcer, 6'4" of muscle and scar tissue. The other was a stranger, mid-30s, wearing an expensive suit that was torn at the shoulder and stained with what looked like blood or oil or both. The stranger's face was a mess, split lip, swollen eye, the kind of damage that suggested a conversation had gotten physical. "Adrian Voss," the stranger said when he walked in, managing to make the name sound like an accusation and a curse. "Finally. Do you know who I am?" Adrian studied him, the suit despite the damage suggesting money, the arrogance despite the beating suggesting power, the fact he was still breathing suggesting either stupidity or connections. "Should I? I'm Daniel Castellano. Vincent Castellano is my uncle." That got Adrian's attention. Vincent Castellano ran the Italian families in 3 states, old money and older violence, the kind of man who could make problems permanent or make them disappear depending on his mood. Vincent Castellano was also someone Adrian had carefully avoided stepping on, knowing that war with the Italians would be expensive at best and fatal at worst. "And you're here because?" Adrian kept his voice neutral, but his mind was already running scenarios, calculating odds, preparing for whatever came next. "Because your man Ray here picked me up last night thinking I was someone else, worked me over for 20 minutes before figuring out the mistake. And now I'm sitting in your warehouse with a broken rib and a phone call to make to my uncle about whether this is something we go to war over." Adrian looked at Ray, who had the good sense to look sick about it. "Explain." "He matched the description," Ray said. "Dark hair, 30s, expensive suit, leaving the Blue Diamond around 2 a.m. Everything fit. I didn't know about the uncle until after." The Blue Diamond was a club in Midtown, neutral territory, where people from different organizations did business without shooting each other. If Ray had grabbed someone there, it was sloppy. If that someone turned out to be Vincent Castellano's nephew, it was potentially catastrophic. Adrian turned back to Daniel. "What were you doing at the Blue Diamond? Having a drink? Meeting a friend? None of your business." Daniel's split lip was bleeding again, but he didn't wipe it away. "The question is what you're going to do about this." This was the moment, the decision that would ripple outward, determine whether the next few months were peace or war. Adrian had built his empire by knowing when to fight and when to fold, when to show strength and when to show sense. "Marcus," Adrian said without taking his eyes off Daniel, "call Dr. Chen. Tell him we need him here in the next hour, full discretion. Ray, you're going to drive Mr. Castellano wherever he wants to go once the doctor clears him, and you're going to apologize the whole way there, professionally." "That's it?" Daniel's voice rose. "A doctor and a car ride?" "No," Adrian said. "That's the immediate response. The rest depends on you. You can call your uncle right now, tell him what happened, and we can let this turn into something expensive for everyone. Or you can wait until you've had that rib looked at, had time to cool down, and then we can have a conversation about how to make this right in a way that doesn't end with bodies in the river. Daniel stared at him, calculating. Adrian could see it happening, the anger warring with pragmatism, the desire for revenge balanced against the intelligence to know that war was bad for business. I want compensation, Daniel said finally. Reasonable. I want Ray disciplined. He will be. And I want your word this was a mistake, not a message. You have it. This was incompetence, not intention. Ray will answer for the incompetence. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll talk to my uncle. Make sure he knows this wasn't a play against the family. Appreciated. Adrian stayed until Dr. Chen arrived, a discreet man who asked no questions and kept no records. Stayed while the doctor confirmed one cracked rib and no internal bleeding. Stayed while Ray helped Daniel into a town car and drove off into the morning traffic. Only when they were gone did Adrian let himself feel the full weight of it, how close they'd come to disaster, how easily one mistake could unravel everything. He matched the description, Ray had said, as if that were enough, as if Adrian's organization had gotten so sloppy that they grabbed civilians off the street based on rough similarities. When had that happened? When had his machine gotten so imprecise? Marcus materialized beside him, holding out a cup of coffee that Adrian didn't remember asking for. He took it anyway, grateful. That could have gone worse, Marcus said. Shouldn't have happened at all. No argument there. Ray knows he screwed up. Ray's done. Adrian said it matter-of-factly, the way you'd note the weather. Give him 2 weeks severance and make sure he understands why. We don't grab people off the street because they match a description. We're not thugs. Marcus nodded. He'd been with Adrian long enough to know when an order was final. What was Ray supposed to be grabbing? Adrian asked. Tommy Ricci. He's been skimming from the Red Hook operation. Thought he could hide it in the accounting. Word was he'd be at the Blue Diamond last night, making deals behind our back. And was he? Yeah. We got him an hour after Ray grabbed Castellano. He's in room 3. Room 3. The windowless box at the back of the warehouse where conversations got serious and people either gave answers or stopped asking questions. Adrian should have felt something about that. Satisfaction, maybe, or vindication. Instead, he just felt tired. Tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. Tired in a way that suggested fundamental damage. Handle it, he told Marcus. I trust your judgment. Marcus's eyebrows went up slightly. Adrian never delegated the serious conversations. Never. It was a point of pride, of control, of being the final word on everything that mattered. But this morning, standing in a warehouse at 7 a.m., his wife gone, a near war averted by luck more than skill, Adrian couldn't find the energy to care about Tommy Ricci's betrayal or punishment. You sure, boss? I'm sure. Make it clean. And Marcus, tighten up the operation. The sloppiness, Ray's mistake, Tommy's theft, it's getting too loose. We need to be better. On it. Adrian left then, walked back through the warehouse and out into the morning that was turning hot and humid the way September mornings did in the city. His phone buzzed with messages. His accountant about the quarterly reports, his club manager about a licensing issue, Monica asking again about dinner. He ignored them all, got in his car, drove toward the penthouse he didn't want to go back to. Ended up at a coffee shop in Chelsea instead, the kind of anonymous place where nobody knew him and nobody cared. Sat by the window with a cappuccino he didn't drink and watched people rush past on their way to jobs and lives that probably had their own complications but seemed, from the outside, enviably simple. A young couple walked by, laughing about something, the woman's hand in the man's back pocket in that casual intimacy that suggested ownership and trust. Adrian watched them until they disappeared around a corner, tried to remember the last time he and Lillian had touched like that. Couldn't. His phone rang. Henry. I've heard from her attorney, Henry said without preamble. Stuart Greenberg, good lawyer, expensive. She's not messing around. What does he want? What any divorce attorney wants. A settlement. She's asking for the penthouse, half the liquid assets, and a clean break. No alimony, interestingly. She just wants out. That's generous. Adrian meant it to sound sarcastic, but it came out hollow. It is, actually. She could ask for a lot more, especially if she knows anything about how you make your money. The fact that she's not suggests either she doesn't know or she doesn't want to know. Either way, it works in your favor. I don't care about the money. Adrian, I don't. She can have the penthouse. She can have half of everything. I just want to talk to her. Can we arrange that? A meeting, supervised if she wants, but I need to see her. Henry was quiet long enough that Adrian knew the answer before he spoke. Greenberg says she's not interested in contact. The only communication she wants is through attorneys. That's ridiculous. We were married for 8 years. 8 years, Henry. She owes me more than a note and radio silence. She doesn't owe you anything, Adrian. That's not how this works. You can't force someone to talk to you no matter how long you were together. Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to rage, wanted to explain that this was different, that they were different, that there had to be some way to fix this if he could just see her face, make her understand. But he'd built his life on reading situations correctly, on knowing when leverage existed and when it didn't. And sitting in that coffee shop, listening to his attorney tell him no, Adrian understood for the first time that he had none. Lillian held all the cards, had probably been collecting them for months while he'd been too busy with Monica and the business and his own arrogance to notice. Fine, he said. Give her what she wants. Just like that? Just like that. I'm not going to drag this out. She wants out. She's out. That's surprisingly mature of you. Don't sound so shocked, Henry. I can be reasonable. Can you? Because in my experience, you're usually the opposite of reasonable when you don't get what you want. Adrian almost smiled at that. Henry was right, of course. Adrian Voss didn't lose, didn't accept defeat, didn't let things slip through his fingers without a fight. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe that's exactly what had pushed Lillian away. His inability to let anything be beyond his control. His need to win every conversation, claim every concession. Maybe she'd left precisely because she knew that fighting him was futile, that the only way out was to go completely, take nothing he could use as leverage, leave him with no angle to work. Just handle it, Adrian told Henry. Whatever she wants, give it to her. I'll sign whatever you put in front of me. He hung up before Henry could respond, stared at his untouched cappuccino until it was cold, then left it there and walked back to his car. Drove to the penthouse he was apparently giving away. Walked through rooms that felt haunted by absence. In the bedroom, he found the envelope still on her pillow where he'd left it. Picked it up, read the note again for probably the 20th time. Take care of yourself. That line, which he'd dismissed earlier, suddenly seemed weighted with meaning. Not take care, as in goodbye, but take care of yourself, as in no one else is going to. As in she'd been taking care of him for 8 years, and now that job was ending and he was on his own. Had she been taking care of him? He thought about it. The meals that appeared when he was too busy to eat, the clothes that materialized cleaned and pressed, the social calendar she'd managed, the appearances she'd made at functions he couldn't be bothered with, the way she'd smoothed edges and managed impressions and made his life easier in 1,000 invisible ways he'd never thought to acknowledge. She'd been holding his world together while he'd been out building empires and taking meetings and sleeping with cocktail waitresses who laughed at his jokes. Adrian sat on the edge of the bed and finally let himself feel it, the full weight of what he'd lost. Not the marriage in abstract, but Lillian specifically. Lillian who'd met him when he was still building, still hungry, still someone who might become something. Lillian who'd looked at him and seen potential instead of danger. Lillian who'd chosen him despite everything, who'd stood beside him when standing beside him meant standing in the blast radius of his choices. Lillian who'd finally had enough of being collateral damage. His phone buzzed. Monica again, persistence verging on annoying. Are you mad at me? You haven't responded all day. All day. It was barely 9 a.m. She measured time differently than he did, lived in some accelerated reality where hours apart required explanation and reassurance. He'd found it charming at first, that neediness, after years of Lillian's self-sufficiency. Now it just seemed exhausting. He typed a response. It's over. Don't contact me again. Sent it before he could reconsider, blocked her number before she could respond. It felt like amputating something infected, necessary, but not painless. The penthouse was too quiet, too empty. Adrian couldn't stay there. He left, no destination in mind, just drove through the city as it woke up and got busy. Ended up in the neighborhood where he and Lillian had lived when they first got together, before the money got serious and the business got dangerous. A walk-up in the East Village, 5th floor, no elevator, Neighbors who played music too loud and cooked things that smelled like other countries. They'd been happy there, he thought. Or had they? Maybe he was rewriting history, painting the past in colors that never existed. Maybe even then there had been signs he'd ignored, fissures he'd plastered over with money and promises. He parked illegally and walked to the building, stood on the sidewalk looking up at what used to be their windows. Someone else lived there now, had lived there for years. Someone else's curtains, someone else's life, someone else's chance at happiness in a space where his had slowly leaked away without him noticing. A woman came out of the building, mid-20s, carrying a yoga mat and wearing the kind of athletic clothes that suggested a life Adrian didn't understand. She glanced at him, seemed to clock him as suspicious. Middle-aged man standing on the sidewalk staring at windows, and walked quickly away. He didn't blame her. He looked like what he was, someone dangerous, someone lost, someone standing in the wreckage of choices he hadn't known he was making. His phone rang. Marcus. Boss, we've got a problem. Adrian almost laughed. Of course they did. Problems were the constant, the thing he could always count on. What now? The feds. They're asking questions about the Red Hook warehouse. Something about the Castellano kid. I think someone saw the pickup, made a call. Shit. Yeah, Henry says we should probably close up that location for a while, scatter the inventory, make ourselves boring to look at. Adrian closed his eyes, leaned against his car, felt the weight of his empire pressing down. This was the life he'd chosen. Constant threat, constant vigilance, constant cleanup. This was what he'd picked over quiet mornings and honest work, and a wife who'd wanted him home for dinner. Do it, he said. Tell Henry I'll call him later about the details. And Marcus? Maybe it's time we started thinking about getting out of the warehouse business altogether. It's too visible, too risky. You thinking about going legitimate? I'm thinking about getting smarter. We've got enough money. We can afford to be selective. Marcus was quiet for a moment. This about Lillian? This is about not spending my 60s in a federal prison because we're too stubborn to evolve. Fair enough. I'll get it moving. Adrian hung up, stood there on the sidewalk in front of a building he hadn't lived in for 8 years, thinking about evolution and choice and the ways people became the worst versions of themselves, one decision at a time. His phone buzzed again. A text from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Voss, this is Stuart Greenberg, representing Lillian Hart. I know you've spoken with your attorney, but Mrs. Hart wanted me to convey something to you directly. She's safe, she's happy, and she's not coming back. Respect that, and this will be easy. Contest it, and it will be difficult. The choice is yours. Mrs. Hart, not Mrs. Voss. She'd already reclaimed her old name, already erased him from her identity. Adrian read the message 3 times, looking for subtext, finding none. It was crystal clear. Back off or face consequences. The kind of message he'd sent 1,000 times to other people, now being delivered to him. The universe had a sense of humor. He typed, "Tell her I understand." Sent it. Meant it. Because what else was there to do? Hunt her down, force a conversation, drag out a divorce until they both hated each other more than they already did. He'd built his life on power, but power had limits. You couldn't make someone love you, couldn't force them to stay. All you could do was accept the loss and try to figure out who you were in the space they left behind. Adrian got in his car and drove back to the penthouse one last time. Spent the afternoon packing his own things, clothes, papers, the items that were definitively his. Left everything else for Lillian to claim or discard as she saw fit. Left the furniture, the art, the kitchen supplies, all the accumulated debris of 8 years together. Left the wedding photos that had hung in the hallway, even though she'd taken her copies. Let them stay on the walls like ghosts, evidence that this had been real once, that they'd stood in front of people and promised forever, and meant it, or thought they meant it, or wanted to mean it. By evening, he'd moved his essentials to a hotel in Midtown. Nothing fancy, just clean and anonymous and quiet. Sat in a room that looked like every other hotel room he'd ever stayed in, and realized this was probably what the rest of his life would look like. Interchangeable spaces, temporary accommodations, the kind of existence where nothing was permanent because commitment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant loss. He called Marcus. "Find me an apartment," Adrian said. "Something small, functional. I don't care about the view or the neighborhood. Just make it somewhere I can work from, somewhere quiet." "You're really doing this?" letting her have the penthouse. I'm really doing this. For what it's worth, boss, I'm sorry. I liked Lillian. She was good for you. Yeah, Adrian said. She was. He hung up, ordered room service he didn't eat, tried to work on contracts he couldn't focus on, ended up standing at the window watching the city lights come on, thinking about all the people out there living their lives, making their choices, some of them probably as lost as he was, some of them probably happy in ways he'd never managed. Somewhere out there, Lillian was starting over, building a new life in a place he didn't know, becoming someone he wouldn't recognize. The thought should have made him angry, the injustice of it, the way she got to reinvent while he was stuck being exactly who he'd always been. Instead, it just made him sad. Sad in a way that was pure and uncomplicated, the kind of sadness that didn't demand action or revenge or resolution, just sad because something was over and couldn't be fixed, and he'd have to learn to live with that. His phone stayed quiet for the rest of the night. No calls from Monica, she'd gotten the message. No calls from Lillian, she'd said everything she had to say in 6 sentences and a dash. No emergencies from Marcus that couldn't wait until tomorrow. Just silence, finally. The kind of silence Adrian had been running from his whole life, filling every moment with noise and action and crisis so he wouldn't have to hear the sound of his own thoughts. Now there was nothing but thoughts, and they weren't kind. He thought about the morning he'd come home to find her gone, how it had seemed impossible that someone could extract themselves so completely. He thought about the months before that, the distance that had grown between them like a language neither of them spoke anymore. He thought about the first time he'd kissed Monica, how it had felt like winning something, like proving he could still have what he wanted even when his marriage was dying. He thought about Lillian reading her books at 3 a.m. because she couldn't sleep, and how he'd never asked why she couldn't sleep. Thought about the way she'd stopped saying, "I love you," at some point, and how he'd stopped noticing when that happened. Thought about all the small ways he'd chosen himself over her, day after day, until choosing himself became the only option that made sense. He thought about what it meant to lose the only person who'd known him before he became this. Adrian Voss, crime boss, power broker, the man who controlled everything except the things that actually mattered. And he thought about tomorrow, and the day after that, and the 1,000 days beyond that, where he'd have to be someone without her as ballast, without her as witness, without her quiet presence making his life mean something beyond accumulation and control. The city glittered below, indifferent to his crisis, full of people who had their own problems and didn't care about his. Somewhere in that sprawl of light and shadow, Lillian was sleeping in a bed he'd never see, dreaming dreams he'd never know about, building a future that didn't include him. And there was nothing he could do about it except accept it, sign the papers when they came, let her go the way she'd already let him go months before he'd noticed. Adrian Voss, who never lost, had lost. The only question now was whether he'd learn anything from it, or whether he'd just rebuild the same walls and make the same mistakes with someone new, because that was easier than changing, easier than looking at the man in the mirror and admitting that power couldn't fill the space where connection should be. He didn't have an answer, not tonight, maybe not ever. But standing there in that anonymous hotel room, looking out at a city that didn't care, Adrian Voss felt something he hadn't felt in years. Small, human, mortal. It was terrifying. It might also be the beginning of something, though he didn't know that yet. For now, it was just loss, pure and complete. The kind that changes you whether you want it to or not. The kind that makes you wonder who you'll be when the dust settles and the silence ends, and you have to face the world as someone new. Or someone old, finally ready to admit what they've always been. The apartment Marcus found was in a building that had seen better decades. 10th floor, 2 bedrooms, windows that faced a brick wall 3 feet away. The kind of place Adrian wouldn't have looked at twice when he was building his empire, when every choice was about image and intimidation. Now it felt appropriate, anonymous, forgettable, the architectural equivalent of surrender. He moved in on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after finding Lillian's note, brought his clothes in suitcases, his files in boxes, nothing that suggested permanence or care. The landlord was a woman in her 60s who chain-smoked and didn't ask questions, just took his cash deposit and handed over keys that stuck in the locks. "Heat's iffy," she said, ash from her cigarette dropping onto the lease he'd just signed. "Radiators clank. You get used to it." Adrian nodded like he cared about radiators, took the keys, carried his life up in the elevator that smelled like someone else's dinner and regret. The first night there, he couldn't sleep. The sounds were all wrong, sirens too close, voices from neighboring apartments bleeding through walls that were supposed to be barriers, the building settling in ways that sounded like footsteps. He lay in a bed he'd bought that afternoon from a furniture store that promised same-day delivery and didn't deliver on the promise, staring at a ceiling with a water stain shaped like a question mark. His phone lit up on the nightstand. Henry sending the final divorce documents for review. Adrian opened the PDF, scrolled through 37 pages of legal language that essentially said, Lillian Hart gets the penthouse and half the liquid assets. Adrian Voss gets to keep his business interests and everything attached to them. Both parties walk away clean with no further obligations. It was generous, as Henry had said. Lillian could have asked for more, could have demanded alimony, could have dragged out the process until they were both bleeding money and goodwill. Instead, she'd taken a clean 50% cut and walked, like she'd already calculated what freedom was worth, and decided it was exactly half of everything they'd built together. Adrian signed the documents on his phone, sent them back to Henry with a message that just said, done. Henry called 30 seconds later. You didn't even read them, Henry said. I read enough. Adrian, this is final. Once I file these, there's no going back. You're sure you don't want to take a few days, think it over? I'm sure. File them tomorrow. Tomorrow's Thanksgiving. Adrian had forgotten. Holidays had stopped meaning anything years ago, just dates on a calendar that other people celebrated. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, they were all the same to him, just days that made traffic worse and closed the banks. Then file them Friday, Adrian said. I don't care. Just get it done. Henry sighed, the sound of a man who'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. You should probably talk to someone, Adrian, a therapist, I mean. This kind of loss, it does things to people. I'm fine. You're living in a shithole apartment in Queens, and you just signed away your marriage without reading the paperwork. You're not fine. It's not Queens, it's the Upper West Side. Oh well, that makes it so much better. Adrian almost smiled at that. Henry was right, as usual. The apartment was a shithole, but it was his shithole, and that mattered somehow, that it was a choice he'd made instead of something someone else had decided for him. I'll think about it, Adrian lied. The therapist thing. No, you won't, but I had to try. Get some sleep, Adrian. Things look better in the morning. They didn't, though. Morning came gray and cold, November asserting itself, and things looked exactly the same as they had at 3 a.m., when he'd finally given up on sleep and made coffee in a kitchen that smelled like the previous tenant's cooking oil and broken dreams. Adrian stood at his window with the coffee burning his throat, looking at the brick wall that was his view, and tried to remember what he was supposed to do with days that didn't have crises attached to them. Before Lillian left, his time had been structured by necessity. Meetings, problems, fires that needed putting out. Now Marcus had taken over most of the daily operations. The warehouse in Red Hook was permanently closed, and Adrian's empire was running smoothly without him having to micromanage every detail. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like being fired from a job that had been his entire identity. His phone rang. Unknown number. Yeah? Mr. Voss, this is Detective Sarah Chen with the NYPD. I was hoping we could talk. Adrian's instincts kicked in immediately. Cop on the phone meant trouble, meant someone was asking questions they shouldn't be asking. He kept his voice neutral. About what? About Daniel Castellano. I understand there was an incident involving him at your warehouse 3 weeks ago. The incident Ray had screwed up. The one that had almost started a war with the Italian families. Adrian had thought that was resolved. Daniel had been compensated. Vincent Castellano had accepted the explanation. Everyone had moved on. Apparently not everyone. I'm not sure what you're talking about, Detective. I own several properties, including warehouse space that I lease to various businesses. If something happened at one of them, I'd need more specific information. The warehouse in Red Hook, the one you closed down the day after Mr. Castellano was assaulted there. I'm sorry. I really don't know what incident you're referring to. And I didn't close any warehouse. I sold that property to a development company. Market timing, you understand. Chen was quiet for a moment. Adrian could hear her breathing, could picture her deciding whether to push or pivot. Mr. Voss, I'm going to be straight with you. I've been a detective for 15 years. I know what you do, even if I can't prove it. I know the Red Hook warehouse wasn't legitimate business. And I know that Daniel Castellano ended up in an emergency room the same night one of your men was seen grabbing someone matching his description off the street. That sounds like a lot of speculation, Detective. It's a lot of facts that I'm trying to connect. Here's what I'm offering. You talk to me voluntarily, tell me what happened that night, and maybe we can clear this up without it becoming an official investigation. Or you can lawyer up, refuse to cooperate, and I can start pulling records and talking to witnesses and making your life complicated. Adrian knew this game. Cops always offered the easy way first. Made it sound like cooperation was in your best interest. Like they were doing you a favor by asking nicely before they started kicking down doors. The smart play was to say nothing, hang up, call Henry, let the attorneys handle it. That's what he would have done 3 weeks ago, when he still had something to protect, when the Empire still felt like it mattered more than anything else. But standing in his shithole apartment on a gray November morning, his marriage officially dissolved, his wife rebuilding her life somewhere he'd never find her, Adrian found he didn't particularly care what Detective Sarah Chen wanted or what investigation she might start. "Let me save you some time, Detective," Adrian said. "One of my employees made a mistake, grabbed the wrong person, realized it quickly, got the person medical attention and compensation. It was handled internally. Everyone involved agreed it was a misunderstanding, and there's no there there. You can investigate all you want, but you're going to find exactly that. A mistake that was corrected." And the person who made the mistake? The one who grabbed Mr. Castellano? No longer in my employ. Convenient. Accurate. I don't tolerate incompetence, Detective. It's bad for business. Chen laughed, sharp and humorless. You're really going to stand there and pretend you run a legitimate operation? I run several legitimate operations. Real estate, import-export, financial consulting, all properly licensed, all tax compliant. If you have evidence otherwise, I'm sure my attorneys would love to see it. I'm sure they would. Here's the thing, Mr. Voss. I don't care about your warehouses or your shell companies or whatever else you're doing that stays in the gray area. What I care about is when civilians get hurt. Daniel Castellano might be connected, but he's still a citizen who got assaulted on my watch. That bothers me. It bothers me too, Adrian said, surprising himself by meaning it. That's why the person responsible was fired and Mr. Castellano was compensated. What else would you like me to do, Detective? I can't undo what happened. You could cooperate with an official investigation, make a statement, let us talk to witnesses, help us build a case that makes sure this doesn't happen again. A case against who? Against me? Because it sounds like you're fishing for evidence of something bigger and using Daniel Castellano as the excuse. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm tired of watching people like you operate in this city like the rules don't apply. Maybe I think if I pull the right thread, the whole thing unravels. Adrian sat down on his new couch that was already uncomfortable, closed his eyes, felt the weight of every choice he'd ever made pressing down. Detective Sarah Chen wanted to take him down, wanted to be the one who finally made charges stick, wanted her name in the papers as the cop who brought down Adrian Voss. A month ago, that would have filled him with rage, would have sent him to Henry's office demanding they prepare for war, would have consumed his every waking moment until he'd found a way to neutralize the threat. Now it just felt exhausting. "Detective, I'm going to give you some free advice," Adrian said. "Whatever thread you think you can pull, it's not worth your time. I've been careful, my attorneys are expensive, and the people you'd need to flip to make a case, they're not going to flip. You're going to spend months, maybe years, chasing something you're never going to catch, and at the end of it, you'll have nothing but a reputation for going after targets you couldn't bring down. Is that really how you want to spend your career? Are you threatening me? I'm being honest with you, something I'm not usually known for. You seem smart, competent. You could probably make detective lieutenant if you focused on cases you could actually close instead of these white whales. I'm just saying maybe there are better uses of your time. And if I decide you're worth my time anyway, then I guess we'll see each other in court. Or not, depending on whether you find anything worth charging. Either way, Detective, I've got nothing else to say without my attorney present. You have a nice day." He hung up before she could respond, sat there holding his phone, waiting for the anger or fear or adrenaline that usually came with cop problems. Nothing came, just a vague sense of inevitability, like watching storm clouds gather and knowing you forgot your umbrella but couldn't find the energy to care about getting wet. His phone buzzed. Marcus. "We need to talk," Marcus said when Adrian answered. "Another problem?" "Depends on your definition. Can you meet me at the office in an hour?" The office was a suite in Midtown, officially belonging to Voss Consulting LLC, unofficially serving as the administrative hub of Adrian's various interests. He hadn't been there since the divorce papers were filed, had been letting Marcus handle everything, trusting him to keep the machine running. "I'll be there," Adrian said. He dressed in a suit that didn't fit quite right anymore. He'd lost weight in the past 3 weeks, stress eating away at him in ways that made his clothes hang loose. Took the subway because his car was still parked at the penthouse he didn't live in anymore. Hadn't had the energy to retrieve it. Sat among morning commuters heading to jobs they probably hated, feeling a kinship with them he'd never felt before. The office was on the 32nd floor, glass and chrome, and the kind of aggressive minimalism that was supposed to suggest success. Adrian's name was on the door in letters that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The receptionist, a young woman named Sophie who'd been there 2 years and still looked nervous when he walked in, jumped slightly when she saw him. "Mr. Voss, I didn't know you were coming in today. Should I—" "Just here to see Marcus. Don't worry about it." Marcus was in his office, surrounded by paperwork and looking like he'd aged another 5 years in the 3 weeks since Adrian had last seen him in person. He stood when Adrian walked in, gestured to the chair across from his desk. "You look like hell," Marcus said. "Feel worse. What's the problem?" Marcus sat back down, picked up a folder, set it down again without opening it. He was stalling, which meant whatever he had to say was bad enough that he was choosing his words carefully. "Just say it," Adrian said. "I've had enough bad news this month that one more won't kill me. Vincent Castellano wants a meeting." That got Adrian's attention. "About Daniel. Among other things, he called me directly, which is unusual. Said he wants to talk to you face to face, no intermediaries. Suggested dinner tomorrow night, neutral location, just the two of you." Adrian processed that. Vincent Castellano didn't do casual dinners, didn't make social calls. If he wanted a meeting, it meant something significant had shifted, some calculation had changed that required direct communication. Did he say what he wants to discuss? No, just that it was important and time-sensitive. He was polite about it, which is also unusual. Vincent's not known for please and thank you. "You think it's a setup?" Marcus shrugged. "Could be. Could also be legitimate business. Vincent's old school. He respects the formalities. If he wanted you dead, he'd probably just make it happen, not invite you to dinner first." "That's comforting. I'm just saying I don't think it's a trap, but I could be wrong." "You want me to tell him no?" Adrian thought about it. Thought about Detective Sarah Chen pulling threads, about the warehouse closing, about the empire that was supposed to matter but felt increasingly like a burden he was carrying for no good reason. "Set it up," he said. "Tomorrow night, wherever he wants. I'll go alone." "The hell you will. I'm coming with you." "Marcus, non-negotiable, boss. You want to meet with Vincent Castellano? Fine. But you're not doing it without backup nearby. I'll stay out of sight, but I'll be there." Adrian could have argued, could have pulled rank and insisted on going alone. But Marcus had been with him for 12 years, had earned the right to be protective, and honestly, Adrian was too tired to fight about it. "Fine. You can lurk in the shadows like the paranoid bastard you are. Just don't make it obvious." "When have I ever been obvious?" "Fair point." Marcus relaxed slightly, picked up the folder he'd been toying with earlier. "There's something else. The Detective Chen situation. She called me too, asking questions about the warehouse, about Daniel, about our employee structure. I told her to talk to our attorneys, but she's persistent. She's fishing, looking for someone to flip, some piece of evidence that connects the dots she wants connected. She won't find it." "You sure about that?" "We've been careful, Marcus. Everything that matters is compartmentalized, insulated. The worst she can prove is some minor regulatory violations, maybe some tax issues. Nothing that puts us away." "And Ray, the guy we fired after the Daniel thing? What about him?" "He's been talking, not to the cops, but around the neighborhood, telling people he got screwed, that he took the fall for something that wasn't his fault. He's angry, Adrian. Angry people make mistakes." Adrian felt a headache forming behind his eyes, the kind that suggested he needed sleep or medication or a complete life change. "Handle it." "How do you want me to handle it?" "I don't care. Talk to him, pay him off, make him understand that talking is bad for his health. Whatever stops him from being a problem. Just handle it." Marcus wrote something down, nodded. "Okay. Anything else you want me to know about? Any other fires I should be aware of?" "Just the usual slow-burning disaster that is my entire existence. You know, the normal stuff." Marcus almost smiled at that. You want to talk about it? About what? About whatever's making you look like you haven't slept in a week. About Lillian. About the fact that you're living in an apartment that's somehow worse than the place you had when I first met you, when you were still clawing your way up. Not particularly. Well, too bad. I'm talking anyway. You're falling apart, Adrian. I've known you long enough to recognize the signs. You're not eating, you're not sleeping, you're making decisions that suggest you don't care what happens to you. That's dangerous. For you, for the business, for everyone who depends on you being sharp. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're the opposite of fine. And I get it. Divorce is hard. Losing Lillian is hard. But you can't just check out. We've got too much in motion, too many people counting on this operation to function. You need to get your head right. Adrian stood up, suddenly angry in a way he hadn't been since this whole thing started. You want me to get my head right? Fine. Tell me how, Marcus. Tell me how I'm supposed to get my head right when my wife left me, because I was too busy building an empire that suddenly feels completely pointless. Tell me how I'm supposed to care about shipments and territories and who's skimming from which operation when the only thing that actually mattered just walked away and isn't coming back. Tell me how I'm supposed to pretend any of this means anything when I just signed away 8 years of my life on a phone screen without even reading the fucking paperwork. The anger drained out of him as quickly as it had come, left him standing there in Marcus's office feeling hollow and ridiculous. Marcus just watched him, expression neutral, waiting for whatever came next. I'm sorry, Adrian said finally. That was unprofessional. That was human. There's a difference. Marcus stood up, walked around his desk, did something he'd never done in 12 years, put a hand on Adrian's shoulder. You're allowed to fall apart. You've earned it. But you can't stay falling apart. That's all I'm saying. Fall apart this week, this month if you need to. But then you pull yourself together and figure out what comes next. Because standing still isn't an option, not in this life. What if I don't know what comes next? Then you figure it out. That's what you do. You figure things out. It's your only actual skill when you strip away all the other bullshit. Adrian laughed despite himself, the sound coming out damaged but real. That might be the meanest compliment anyone's ever given me. I'm a complicated guy. Look, go home, get some sleep, show up tomorrow night for this Vincent meeting, and we'll see what he wants. Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's everything, but whatever it is, you need to be present for it. Can you do that? I can try. That's all I'm asking. Adrian left the office, rode the subway back to his apartment, climbed the 10 flights because the elevator was broken, and the super didn't care. Lay down on his uncomfortable couch and closed his eyes, tried to find some version of rest that didn't involve dreaming about Lillian. Failed completely. He dreamed about the day they got married. City Hall. No guests, just them and a judge who'd done 3 other weddings that afternoon and treated theirs with the same bureaucratic efficiency. Lillian had worn a white dress she'd bought the day before, simple and elegant, the kind of dress that suggested celebration without requiring it. Adrian had worn a suit he already owned, hadn't seen the point in buying something new for what was essentially a legal formality. They'd made promises to each other that day. Sickness and health, richer or poorer, till death did them part. Standard vows, nothing poetic or personalized, just the traditional words that billions of people had spoken before them. He'd meant them when he said them. Thought he did anyway. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe meaning something in the moment wasn't enough if you didn't keep meaning it every day after. His phone woke him from the dream, buzzing insistently on the coffee table. Henry. The papers are filed, Henry said. Officially, as of 3 hours ago. You're divorced, Adrian. Congratulations. Adrian sat up, rubbed his face, tried to find words that matched what he was supposed to be feeling, came up empty. That's it? He said finally. That's all there is to it. Well, there's a 60-day waiting period for it to be final. But yeah, essentially, that's it. 8 years over in the time it takes to file paperwork. Modern love, right? Right. You okay? Everyone keeps asking me that. Because you sound like someone who's not okay. Look, I know I suggested therapy before and you blew me off, but I'm going to suggest it again. Serious suggestion this time. I've got a guy, discreet, works with a lot of high net worth individuals who need someone to talk to without it ending up in the tabloids. Want his number? Sure. Why not? Henry gave him the name and number, made Adrian promise he'd actually call, then hung up with something that almost sounded like sympathy. Adrian saved the therapist's contact information, knew he'd probably never use it, but appreciated the gesture anyway. The rest of the day disappeared into nothing, hours that passed without significance, time that meant nothing because there was nothing to fill it with. He tried reading, couldn't focus. Tried working, couldn't care. Ended up standing at his window again, looking at the brick wall, thinking about Lillian somewhere out there living a life that didn't include him. Thinking about how you could spend 8 years beside someone and still end up strangers. Night came early now that it was almost December, darkness settling over the city by 5:30. Adrian ordered takeout he didn't want, ate half of it, threw the rest away. Checked his phone compulsively, even though there was no one he wanted to hear from, no messages that would make anything better. At 11, he gave up on the idea of sleep and went for a walk. The neighborhood was quiet this time of night, just the occasional delivery person or late shift worker heading home. He walked without destination, letting his feet make decisions his brain couldn't. Ended up in Central Park somehow, sitting on a bench near the lake. A woman jogged past, earbuds in, oblivious to him. A homeless man shuffled by, pushing a shopping cart full of returnable cans and life's accumulation. A young couple walked hand in hand, laughing about something private, wrapped up in each other the way Adrian and Lillian had been once, before everything got complicated. He sat there until his hands went numb from the cold, until the park emptied out completely, and he was alone with the night and his thoughts. Sat there trying to remember who he'd been before he became this. Before the empire, before the violence, before the careful construction of power that had cost him everything that actually mattered. Couldn't do it. That person, if they'd ever existed, was too far gone to recover. His phone buzzed. Marcus, checking in. You alive? Marcus asked. Mostly. Good enough. Remember, tomorrow night, Vincent Castellano. I'll text you the location in the morning. Be ready. I will. And Adrian, whatever he wants, whatever he offers, think before you answer. Vincent doesn't waste time on social calls. If he's meeting with you, he wants something. Make sure you know what it is before you give him an answer. Noted. Get some sleep. You too. Adrian hung up, sat on that bench for another hour, watching the city lights reflect off the lake like scattered stars, thinking about tomorrow and Vincent Castellano and whatever conversation was coming that required this much setup. Thinking about how funny it was that his empire was still making demands, still requiring his attention, even though he'd stopped caring whether it survived or burned. The machine he'd built was bigger than him now, had momentum that existed independent of his investment. It would keep running whether he was present or not, keep generating problems and profits and crises that needed solving. And he'd keep solving them, because that's what he did, because standing still wasn't an option, because Marcus was right, falling apart was allowed, but staying fallen apart would get you killed. So Adrian Voss would pull himself together, would show up tomorrow night and meet with Vincent Castellano and handle whatever needed handling, would keep the empire running even though the empire had cost him the only thing worth having, would keep being Adrian Voss because he didn't know how to be anyone else, and at 42 it was probably too late to learn. He walked home through streets that smelled like garbage and possibility, climbed 10 flights of stairs that left him breathing hard, lay down in a bed that wasn't his, and tried again to find sleep. This time, it came. And with it, dreams of Lillian that felt less like memory and more like haunting, her face fading around the edges, her voice growing distant, until she was just a presence he'd once known, receding into the past where she belonged, where he'd put her by choosing wrong again and again, until choosing wrong became the only choice he knew how to make. The restaurant Vincent chose was in Little Italy, a place called Terrazza that had been there since the 50s and looked like it hadn't been updated since. Red leather booths, checkered tablecloths, photographs of Frank Sinatra and Joe DiMaggio on the walls like patron saints. The kind of establishment where the menu never changed, and the owner remembered your grandfather's favorite dish. Adrian arrived 15 minutes early, a habit from years of never wanting to be the second person in a room. The maitre d' recognized him immediately, not by name, but by type. Men like Adrian had a look, a way of carrying themselves that suggested danger wrapped in expensive fabric. Mr. Castellano is expecting you, the maitre d' said, gesturing toward the back. Private room, Of course, it was a private room. Vincent Castellano didn't conduct business where people could overhear, didn't leave evidence of conversations that might matter later. The private room was small, intimate, designed for exactly the kind of meeting they were about to have. One table, 4 chairs, a window that looked out onto an alley where trash bags were stacked like evidence of civilization's excess. Vincent was already there, sitting with his back to the wall, a position that let him see the door and everything that came through it. He was 73, looked 60, carried himself like a man who'd seen every variation of human weakness and stopped being surprised by any of it. Silver hair combed back, suit that probably cost what most people made in a month, hands that were weathered but steady. He stood when Adrian entered, offered his hand. "Adrian, thank you for coming." They shook, the grip firm but not aggressive, 2 men who understood that posturing was for amateurs. "Vincent, your nephew's recovering well, I hope?" "He is. The boy's got a hard head, takes after his mother's side." Vincent gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. I took the liberty of ordering wine. You still drink Barolo?" Adrian sat, surprised Vincent knew his preference. "I do. Good memory is important in our line of work. Helps you know who to trust and who to bury." A waiter appeared with the wine, poured 2 glasses, disappeared without being asked. The service had the quality of choreography, rehearsed and precise. Vincent raised his glass. To business relationships that survive mistakes. Adrian raised his own glass, wondering if this was genuine diplomacy or the kind of setup where the toast came before the knife. They drank, the wine coating his throat with tannins and complexity, the kind of expensive that was supposed to justify itself with every sip. "Your man Marcus is outside," Vincent said, setting down his glass. "Silver sedan, 2 blocks east. Tell him he can relax. If I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead." Adrian allowed himself a small smile. "He's protective. Good help is hard to find. Marcus has been with you, 12 years? Thereabouts. Loyal. That's worth more than competence. You can teach competence. Loyalty is either there or it isn't." Vincent leaned back, studied Adrian with eyes that missed nothing. "You look tired, Adrian. Things not going well?" "Just going through some changes, personal stuff." "Your wife left you." Adrian kept his expression neutral, even as something cold moved through his chest. "You've been paying attention." "I pay attention to everyone in my orbit. You're in my orbit, whether you want to be or not." Lillian Hart, formerly Lillian Voss, filed for divorce 6 weeks ago. Papers were finalized yesterday. She's living in Portland now, teaching art classes at a community center. Started over completely, from what I understand. Smart woman. The casual recitation of facts Adrian didn't know. Portland, art classes, the life Lillian was building without him, felt like violence delivered with a smile. Vincent wasn't threatening him, wasn't even being cruel. He was just demonstrating reach, showing that his intelligence network extended into corners Adrian had thought were private. "That's impressive surveillance," Adrian said carefully. "That's basic due diligence. I like to know what's happening with the people I do business with. Helps me understand their state of mind, their vulnerabilities." "You understand?" Adrian did. He'd done the same thing to others, gathered information as insurance against future problems. Having it done to him was different, felt invasive in ways he couldn't quite articulate. "So, what's this about, Vincent? You didn't invite me here to discuss my divorce." "No, I didn't. Though I am sorry about that. Divorce is hard, especially when you're the one who got left. Makes you question everything, doesn't it? Makes you wonder what the point of all this is." Vincent gestured vaguely, encompassing the restaurant, the city, the empire they'd both built. "We spend our lives accumulating power, money, respect. And for what? So we can die alone in expensive houses, wondering if any of it meant anything? That's unusually philosophical for you." "I'm 73, Adrian. I've earned the right to be philosophical. At my age, you start thinking about legacy, about what you leave behind. That's why I wanted to talk to you." The waiter returned with appetizers neither of them had ordered. Calamari, bruschetta, the kind of food that appeared because Vincent wanted it to appear. They waited until he was gone before continuing. "I'm retiring," Vincent said, the words falling like stones into still water. Adrian processed that, all the implications spreading outward like ripples. Vincent Castellano retiring meant a power vacuum, meant territories up for grabs, meant the careful balance of the city's underworld shifting in ways that could be profitable or catastrophic depending on how things shook out. When? Adrian asked. Soon. 6 months, maybe less. I'm tired, Adrian. Tired of the constant vigilance, tired of the young idiots who think they can take what I've built, tired of looking over my shoulder waiting for the next problem. I want to spend whatever time I've got left with my grandchildren, maybe take my wife on that trip to Sicily she's been asking about for 20 years. That's a big decision. It is, which is why I need to make sure the transition is smooth. Need to make sure the families don't tear each other apart the moment I step back. That's where you come in. Adrian took a drink of wine, buying time to think. I'm listening. I've been watching you for a long time, longer than you probably realize. You're smart, Adrian. Disciplined. You don't make moves unless you've calculated the odds, and you don't start fights you can't win. That's rare in this business. Most people, they let their egos drive decisions. They'd rather be feared than rich, rather be respected than safe. You're different. You understand that the goal is survival, not glory. I appreciate the compliment, but I'm still waiting to hear what you want. Vincent smiled, the expression containing something like approval. Direct. I like that. Here's what I want. I'm consolidating my operations, passing them to my son Carlo. But Carlo's green, doesn't have the relationships or the respect yet. He needs allies, people who can vouch for him, help him navigate the first year when everyone's going to be testing him. I want you to be one of those people. You want me to what exactly? Publicly support your son? That's a big ask. Not publicly, quietly. When the young wolves start circling, when they start thinking Carlo's weak because he's new, I want you to make it clear that going after him means going after you too. I want your weight behind him, at least until he's established enough to stand on his own. Adrian turned his wine glass, watching the liquid catch the light. This was the moment Vincent had been building toward, the real reason for the dinner and the wine and the show of respect. Vincent wanted insurance for his son, wanted to buy protection from someone he considered reliable. The smart play was obvious. Agree. Forge an alliance with the Castellano family, expand his influence while appearing to do a favor. It was the kind of move he would have made without hesitation a year ago, 6 months ago, even before Lillian left. But sitting there in that private room, listening to Vincent talk about legacy and grandchildren and trips to Sicily, Adrian couldn't find the energy to care about expansion or influence or any of it. Why me? Adrian asked. You've got other allies, people who've been in your orbit longer than I have. Why not ask one of them? Because they're old, and old men make alliances based on nostalgia instead of sense. You're younger, still building, still hungry, or at least you were. Now I'm not so sure. What does that mean? Vincent leaned forward, his expression shifting to something harder. It means you're sitting here looking like a man who's already given up. It means I'm offering you an opportunity to expand your influence, and you're treating it like an obligation. It means your wife leaving you has done exactly what I was afraid it would do, made you soft. The word hit like a slap. Adrian felt anger rise, hot and immediate, the kind that made him want to stand up and walk out, end this conversation before it went somewhere unrecoverable. But he stayed seated, forced himself to breathe, to think instead of react. I'm not soft, he said quietly. I'm just tired of pretending any of this matters. Then you're in the wrong business. This business requires you to care, to be hungry, to want more than you have. The moment you stop caring is the moment you're dead. Maybe not literally, but in every way that counts. Maybe I'm okay with that. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those eyes that had seen everything. You know what I think, Adrian? I think you're depressed. I think losing Lillian broke something in you that you don't know how to fix. I think you're going through the motions because you don't know how to do anything else. And I think if you're not careful, that depression is going to get you killed. Is this the part where you offer fatherly advice? This is the part where I tell you that I've been where you are. Different circumstances, same feeling. My first wife left me 40 years ago. Took my daughter, moved to California, said she couldn't live with what I was anymore. I spent a year pretending I was fine, running my business, making money, acting like it didn't matter. Then one day I realized I was standing on a bridge at 3 a.m, looking at the water, thinking about how easy it would be to just step off. Adrian said nothing, didn't trust himself to speak. I didn't step off, Vincent continued. Obviously. But it took getting that close to make me understand something important. This life, What we do, it's a choice. Every day you wake up, you're choosing it. And if you're not choosing it for the right reasons, if you're just going through the motions because you don't know what else to do, then you're already dead. You're just waiting for someone else to make it official. So what did you do? How did you make it matter again? I found different reasons. Stopped building the empire for me and started building it for the people who depended on me. My family, my soldiers, the communities we operated in. I made it about something bigger than my own ego or my own pain. That's what gave me purpose again. Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to say that was just rationalization, that Vincent had simply found new ways to justify the same violence and corruption. But he couldn't because he understood the impulse, recognized the need to make meaning where none existed naturally. And if I can't find those reasons, Adrian asked, what if I look around at my empire and all I see is an expensive way to die alone? Then you get out. Sell everything, take your money, move to Portland and teach art classes next to your ex-wife. That's a choice too, Adrian. But you have to actually choose it, commit to it, not just drift toward it because you're too tired to do anything else. The waiter returned with entrees, veal for Vincent, pasta for Adrian, dishes that appeared because someone in the kitchen knew what Vincent liked and assumed Adrian would accept whatever came. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the food excellently prepared and completely uninteresting to Adrian's palate. I need time, Adrian said finally, to think about your offer, to figure out if I'm still in this or if I'm just pretending. Vincent nodded like he'd expected that answer. Take a week. After that, I need to know, are you someone I can count on, or are you someone I need to work around? No judgment either way, but I need to know. Fair enough. They finished the meal with small talk, sports, weather, the safe topics that men used when the real conversation was over. Vincent paid, because Vincent always paid, establishing that this was his territory and his rules. They shook hands at the door, the grip firm and final. One more thing, Vincent said before Adrian could leave. Your wife, Lillian. I know you're hurting, and I know you probably want to fix it, win her back, make it right somehow. Don't. Excuse me? Don't try to fix it. She left for a reason, and that reason was you. Not the you that you could be if you changed, but the you that you actually are. Trying to win her back means either lying about who you are or actually changing, and neither of those things ends well. Accept the loss. Learn from it if you can. But don't chase her. That way leads nowhere good. Adrian wanted to be angry at the presumption, at Vincent inserting himself into something that wasn't his business. But the advice had the weight of experience behind it, the kind of hard-earned wisdom that came from making the mistake yourself. I'll keep that in mind, Adrian said. He left the restaurant, found Marcus waiting in the silver sedan exactly where Vincent had said he'd be. Got in the passenger seat, closed his eyes against the streetlights that felt too bright. How'd it go, Pux? Marcus asked. He offered me an alliance, wants me to back his son when he retires. And I told him I'd think about it. Marcus pulled into traffic, navigated the evening streets with the easy competence of someone who knew the city like a native language. You gonna take it? I don't know. He also told me I looked depressed and that if I'm not careful, I'm going to get myself killed. He's not wrong. You think I'm depressed? Marcus was quiet for a block, 2 blocks, long enough that Adrian opened his eyes to see if he'd heard the question. Marcus was staring straight ahead, hands at 10 and 2, expression carefully neutral. I think you're going through something that would break most people, Marcus said finally. And I think you're handling it about as well as anyone could, which is to say not great, but not terrible. But yeah, if I'm being honest, you seem lost. Like you're waiting for someone to tell you what to do next because you don't trust yourself to know. That's disturbingly perceptive. I've been watching you for 12 years. I know what you look like when you're sharp, and this isn't it. They drove in silence for a while, the city passing by in familiar patterns. Streets Adrian had walked, buildings he owned pieces of, neighborhoods where his influence extended like invisible weather. His empire, such as it was, spread out before him like a map of decisions that had seemed important at the time. Vincent also said Lillian's in Portland, Adrian said, teaching art classes. Marcus nodded. I know. Found that out 2 weeks ago. Wasn't sure if you wanted to hear it. You knew and didn't tell me? You told me not to look for her. Said you were respecting her wishes, letting her go. What was I supposed to do? Bring you information you explicitly said you didn't want? Adrian couldn't argue with that logic. Fair point. What else do you know? Not much. She's renting a studio apartment, working part-time at the community center, keeping to herself mostly, starting over clean, like Vincent said. You want more details? No. Yes. I don't know. Adrian rubbed his face, felt the stubble that suggested he'd stopped caring about appearances. Vincent told me not to try to fix it, said it would end badly. Vincent's probably right. Everyone keeps saying that. Henry said it, you're saying it, Vincent's saying it. When did everyone become an expert on my marriage? When you started asking people about it. Look, boss, you want my real opinion? Do I have a choice? Lillian left because staying was killing her. I don't mean that dramatically. I mean it literally. I watched it happen over the past year, watched her get quieter, smaller, like she was disappearing piece by piece. You didn't see it because you weren't looking, but I saw it. And the kindest thing you can do for her now is leave her alone. Let her build whatever life she's building without you haunting the edges of it. Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to say Marcus didn't understand, that there was still something worth saving if he could just get Lillian to listen. But the truth was, Marcus had probably seen it more clearly than he had watched from the outside while Adrian was too buried in his own perspective to notice what was happening. When did you become so wise? Adrian asked. I'm not wise. I'm just less stupid than I used to be. There's a difference. They arrived at Adrian's apartment building, the exterior looking worse in the streetlight than it did in daylight. Marcus put the car in park but didn't kill the engine. You need anything? Marcus asked. Like what? I don't know. Company? Backup? Someone to make sure you don't do anything stupid? I'm fine, Marcus. I'm not going to do anything stupid. You say that, but Vincent's bridge story has me concerned. You're not thinking about bridges, are you? Adrian almost laughed. No, I'm not thinking about bridges. I'm just thinking about how I got here and whether there's any way forward that doesn't involve becoming someone completely different. And I don't have an answer yet. Give me a week, like Vincent said. I'll figure out if I'm still in this or if it's time to cash out and disappear. Marcus looked like he wanted to say more, but he just nodded. Call me if you need anything. I mean it, Adrian. 3 a.m, doesn't matter. You need to talk, you call. I will. Adrian got out, watched Marcus drive away, climbed the 10 flights because the elevator was still broken and the super still didn't care. His apartment greeted him with the same silence it always did, the same absence of anything that suggested a life worth living. He poured himself a drink, scotch again, because that's what you drank when you were feeling sorry for yourself and didn't care about being cliché. Sat by the window with the brick wall view, thinking about Vincent's bridge story, about the moment when you're close enough to the edge that the decision becomes real instead of theoretical. Adrian wasn't there yet, wasn't thinking about bridges or endings or permanent solutions to temporary problems, but he could see how you got there, could trace the path from where he was to where Vincent had been 40 years ago, and that scared him more than he wanted to admit. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mr. Voss, this is Dr. Chen, Detective Chen's brother. I run a private practice in Manhattan, work with individuals in high-stress professions who need discreet mental health support. Your attorney, Henry Marsh, suggested I reach out. I have an opening tomorrow at 2 p.m. if you're interested. Adrian stared at the message, trying to decide if this was Henry being helpful or Henry being intrusive. Probably both. Henry was good at helpful intrusion, at doing the thing you needed before you knew you needed it. He should ignore it, should delete the message and pretend he never saw it, maintain the fiction that he was handling everything fine and didn't need help from anyone. But sitting there in his shithole apartment, drinking scotch alone while thinking about bridges and endings, Adrian found he couldn't sustain the fiction anymore. He typed, I'll be there. Sent it before he could reconsider, then immediately regretted it, then decided regret didn't matter if he showed up anyway. His phone rang, not a number he recognized, but not blocked either. He answered, Yeah? Adrian Voss? A woman's voice, professional and careful. Who's asking? This is Rebecca Liang. I'm an attorney representing Raymond Santos. Ray, your former employee, he'd like to meet with you, discuss his termination and possible compensation for the work he did before his employment ended. Ray. The enforcer he'd fired after the Daniel Castellano disaster, the one Marcus said was talking around the neighborhood. Now he had a lawyer and was making noise about compensation. Ray got severance, Adrian said. 2 weeks' pay, which was generous considering he screwed up badly enough to almost start a war. He has a different perspective on that situation. He believes he was following orders, executing a plan you approved, and that he's being scapegoated for systemic issues within your organization. He grabbed the wrong person off the street and beat him up. That's not a systemic issue, that's incompetence. Again, he has a different perspective. He'd like to discuss it with you directly, without lawyers if possible. Just a conversation, neutral location, see if you can come to an understanding. Adrian's instincts screamed trap. Ray with a lawyer making demands was Ray building a case, probably working with Detective Chen, probably wired for sound and looking for evidence. Meeting with him would be stupid, dangerous, exactly the kind of move that led to indictments. But Adrian was tired of being smart, tired of calculating every move 3 steps ahead, tired of treating every interaction like a chess game where one wrong move meant destruction. Fine, he said. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., the coffee shop on Amsterdam and 82nd. Tell Ray to come alone. No wire, no tricks. Just a conversation. Rebecca Liang was quiet for a moment, probably surprised he'd agreed so easily. I'll convey that. Thank you, Mr. Voss. Don't thank me yet. If Ray shows up wired or with cops nearby, the conversation ends before it starts, and he can take his complaints to whoever will listen. Understood. Adrian hung up, immediately called Marcus. Ray's lawyer just called, Adrian said when Marcus answered. Wants a meeting tomorrow morning to discuss his termination. It's either a shakedown or a setup. Probably both. You're not actually meeting with him. I am actually. 9 a.m., that coffee shop near my place. The hell you are. That's exactly what Chen wants. You and Ray in the same room, him wearing a wire, you saying something incriminating? It's a trap, Adrian. Maybe, but I'm going anyway. Why? What possible good can come from this? Because I'm tired of running from every problem. Because maybe Ray's got a legitimate grievance and I can fix it with money instead of letting it turn into something worse. Because I don't care anymore, Marcus. I just don't care. Marcus was quiet for a long time. You're scaring me, boss. Yeah, well, join the club. Look, if it makes you feel better, sit outside during the meeting. If it goes sideways, you can swoop in and rescue me from my own stupidity. That's not reassuring? It wasn't meant to be. I'll call you after. Get some sleep, Marcus. Adrian hung up before Marcus could argue further, finished his scotch, poured another one. Sat there planning what he'd say to Ray, how he'd handle whatever accusations or demands came. Thought about bridges and therapy and ex-wives in Portland and empires that felt increasingly like prisons. Thought about Vincent's question. Was he still in this, or was he just pretending? He didn't have an answer. But tomorrow, between Ray at 9 and Dr. Chen at 2 and whatever else the universe decided to throw at him, maybe he'd start figuring it out. Or maybe he'd just keep drifting, letting circumstances decide for him, because making decisions required caring about outcomes, and caring about outcomes required believing the future mattered. And Adrian Voss, sitting alone in an apartment that cost less than his watch, drinking scotch that tasted like regret, wasn't sure he believed that anymore. The night stretched ahead of him, long and empty and full of thoughts he didn't want to have. He turned off the lights, lay down on his uncomfortable couch because the bed felt too big and too lonely, closed his eyes against the darkness that matched what he felt inside. Tomorrow would come whether he was ready or not. Problems would need solving, decisions would need making, the empire would demand its pound of flesh. And Adrian would give it because that's what he did, because the alternative was admitting defeat and he wasn't there yet. Not quite. But close enough that he could see it from where he stood, close enough that Vincent's bridge story didn't sound dramatic or metaphorical, but practical and tempting. Close enough that therapy at 2 p.m. felt less like weakness and more like the only smart move he'd made in months. Sleep came eventually, fitful and full of dreams he wouldn't remember in the morning. Dreams of Lillian teaching art to strangers in Portland. Dreams of Ray wearing a wire. Dreams of Vincent standing on a bridge looking at water that promised an end to everything. Dreams of choices and consequences and the slow accumulation of decisions that add up to a life you don't recognize as your own. And through it all, the question Vincent had asked, echoing like something that wouldn't let him rest. Was this life a choice he was making, or just the path of least resistance dressed up as purpose? Adrian still didn't know, but tomorrow maybe he'd start looking for an answer. Ray was already at the coffee shop when Adrian arrived, sitting at a corner table with a view of the door. He looked worse than Adrian remembered, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested sleep was something that happened to other people. His hands were wrapped around a coffee cup like he needed the warmth, and there was a nervous energy to him that Adrian recognized from men who'd made bad decisions and were now living with the consequences. Adrian got his own coffee, black, no sugar, the same way he'd been drinking it for 20 years, and sat down across from Ray without preamble. "You wired?" Adrian asked. Ray pulled up his shirt, showing his bare chest and the wire-free expanse of skin, turned around in his chair so Adrian could see his back. "No wire. I'm not working with the cops, Adrian. I'm just trying to survive." "Your lawyer made it sound like you wanted compensation." "My lawyer makes everything sound like a lawsuit because that's how lawyers think. What I actually want is my job back." Adrian blinked, surprised. "Your job back?" "Yeah, look, I know I screwed up with the Castellano kid. I know it was bad. Could have been catastrophic. But I've been with you for 8 years, Adrian. 8 years of doing what needed doing, handling the problems nobody else wanted to handle. And you threw me away over one mistake. One mistake that almost started a war. One mistake that I made following a description you approved. Tommy Ricci was supposed to be at the Blue Diamond that night. Dark hair, 30s, expensive suit, leaving around 2 a.m. That's what we had. That's what I saw. Was I supposed to ask for ID before making the grab?" Adrian took a drink of his coffee, burning his tongue slightly, using the pain to focus. Ray had a point, however uncomfortable it was to acknowledge. The description had been vague, the intel had been imprecise, and Ray had done exactly what he'd been trained to do, act decisively based on incomplete information. "You beat a civilian," Adrian said. "Broke his rib. I interrogated someone I thought was Tommy Ricci until I realized he wasn't. That's not the same thing. And yeah, it got physical, but that's what interrogations do. You taught me that, Adrian. You taught me that sometimes you have to push to get answers. I also taught you to be sure you had the right person before you started pushing." Ray leaned forward, his voice dropping. "You know what I think? I think you needed someone to blame for your own sloppiness, for the fact that our operation had gotten so loose that mistakes like this were inevitable. And I was convenient. The muscle, the enforcer, the guy who's easy to throw away because there's always another guy who'll do what I did. That's not what happened, isn't it? Think about it, Adrian. Your marriage was falling apart, your focus was somewhere else, and the business was suffering because of it. But instead of admitting that, instead of tightening things up yourself, you fired me and told yourself that was the problem solved. Scapegoat the soldier, pretend the general's still sharp." Adrian felt anger rising, hot and immediate, the kind that made him want to walk out of this conversation before it went somewhere neither of them could come back from. But underneath the anger was something else, recognition. Because Ray wasn't entirely wrong. The weeks before Lillian left had been chaotic, unfocused. Adrian had been distracted by Monica, by the slow dissolution of his marriage, by 1,000 small crises that he'd handled poorly because his attention was divided. The operation had gotten sloppy because he'd gotten sloppy, and Ray had paid the price for systemic failures that went way beyond one bad grab. "What do you want me to say?" Adrian asked. "That you're right?" "Fine, you're right. I was distracted. The operation suffered, and you got caught in the fallout. But that doesn't change the fact that you screwed up, Ray. Intent doesn't matter when the result is Vincent Castellano's nephew in an emergency room. I'm not asking you to say I didn't screw up. I'm asking you to acknowledge that I'm not the only one who did, and I'm asking for another chance. Working for me again? Working with you. I've had 2 months to think about this, about what went wrong and how to fix it. You need someone who can tighten up your security protocols, someone who can make sure the kind of mistake I made doesn't happen again. Let me be that person. Let me earn my way back." Adrian studied him, looking for deception, finding only desperation. Ray needed this, needed the structure, the purpose, the identity that came from being part of something bigger than himself. Without it, he was just a man with a skill set that had no legitimate applications, drifting toward worse choices because better ones weren't available. "You've been talking," Adrian said, "around the neighborhood. Marcus heard you've been vocal about how you got screwed." Ray had the good grace to look embarrassed. "I was angry. Felt like I'd been thrown away after 8 years of loyalty. But I haven't said anything specific, haven't named names or mentioned details. Just general complaints about getting fired unfairly." "And Detective Chen? She talked to you?" "She tried. Called me twice, wanted to meet. I told her I had nothing to say. She's persistent, though. Keeps leaving messages about how she can help me if I help her." "And you're not tempted? To flip? To testify against you in exchange for what? Immunity for crimes I committed while working for you? That math doesn't work, Adrian. Best case, I trade one set of problems for another. Worst case, I end up in witness protection somewhere in Kansas, living under a fake name, looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. No thanks. Adrian wanted to believe him, wanted to think Ray's loyalty was genuine and not just pragmatic. But trust was a commodity he'd been spending carelessly lately, and he wasn't sure he had enough left to invest in a second chance that might be a mistake. I'll think about it, Adrian said finally. Give me a few days to consider whether bringing you back makes sense. In the meantime, stop talking around the neighborhood. Stop answering Chen's calls. Keep your head down and give me space to make a decision. That's all I'm asking. And Ray? If I do bring you back, it won't be the same as before. Things are changing. I'm changing. The operation's changing. You'd be coming back to something different than what you left. Different how? I don't know yet. I'm still figuring that out. Ray nodded, like that answer made sense, even though it probably didn't. They finished their coffee in silence, two men who'd shared 8 years of history trying to decide if there were 8 more years ahead, or if this was goodbye dressed up as maybe. Ray left first, disappearing into the morning foot traffic. Adrian sat there for another 20 minutes, watching people come and go, ordinary citizens with ordinary problems, living lives that probably felt complicated to them, but looked beautifully simple from the outside. His phone buzzed. Marcus, checking in. How'd it go? Marcus asked. He wants his job back. You're kidding. Nope. Says he was scapegoated for systemic failures, that he deserves another chance. He's not entirely wrong. Adrian, bringing Ray back is a terrible idea. He's compromised, emotional, possibly working with Chen whether he admits it or not. Or he's exactly what he appears to be, a loyal soldier who made a mistake and wants to make it right. And if you're wrong, if he comes back and immediately feeds information to Chen or screws up again in a way we can't contain, then I'll deal with it. But Marcus, I'm tired of throwing people away because they're not perfect. I'm tired of demanding perfection from everyone else when I can't even get my own life together. Maybe Ray deserves a second chance. Maybe we all do. Marcus was quiet for a beat. This is about Lillian, isn't it? You're projecting your guilt about the divorce onto Ray's situation. Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally seeing things clearly for the first time in years. I don't know, Marcus. I don't know anything anymore except that the way I've been doing things isn't working. So what are you going to do? I'm going to therapy at 2. Then I'm going to make decisions about Ray and Vincent's offer and whether I'm still in this business or if it's time to cash out. But right now, I'm going to sit here and drink bad coffee and try to remember what it feels like to not have everything be a crisis. You want company? No, but I appreciate the offer. Adrian hung up, ordered another coffee he didn't want, watched the city wake up and get busy around him. At 11, he left the coffee shop and walked, no destination in mind, just movement as antidote to thinking. He ended up at the library on 42nd Street, that massive building with the stone lions out front that had stood there since before he was born. Went inside because it was free and warm and full of people who weren't interested in him. Found himself in the reading room, surrounded by students and researchers and people who still believed knowledge mattered. Adrian sat at a long wooden table worn smooth by decades of use, surrounded by strangers pursuing their own quests for meaning, and felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not contentment, just the absence of the constant pressure that had defined his life for as long as he could remember. He could stay here, he thought. Could just not leave. Could become one of those people who lived in libraries, making a home in the stacks, surrounded by other people's stories, because their own had become unlivable. But 2 o'clock came whether he wanted it to or not, and Dr. Chen's office was waiting. The office was on the west side, 3rd floor of a building that tried for elegance and settled for respectable. The waiting room had the usual furniture, chairs that weren't quite comfortable, magazines nobody read, a receptionist who smiled like she was paid to care. Dr. Michael Chen was younger than Adrian expected, maybe 40, with the kind of face that suggested he'd seen things but hadn't let them break him. He shook Adrian's hand with a grip that was firm, without being aggressive, gestured to a chair that was actually comfortable. "Thank you for coming," Dr. Chen said. "I know therapy can feel intimidating, especially for someone in your position." "My position? Successful, powerful, used to being in control. Men like you don't usually ask for help until the alternative is worse than the embarrassment." Adrian almost smiled. Your sister's a detective. She called me last week trying to build a case. I know. Sarah and I talk, though I obviously can't share anything you tell me with her. Doctor-patient privilege trumps sibling relationships. She know you're seeing me? She knows you're a client. She doesn't know why, and she won't ask because she respects boundaries. Mostly. Dr. Chen leaned back in his chair, relaxed but attentive. So tell me, Adrian, what brings you here? My attorney thought I needed someone to talk to. Something about my wife leaving me and me not handling it well. And are you handling it well? I'm sitting in a therapist's office, so probably not. Fair enough. Let's start with something basic. How are you sleeping? Badly. 3-4 hours a night, sometimes less. Eating? When I remember. And how's your mood? On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is suicidal and 10 is happiest you've ever been, where would you say you are? Adrian thought about it, trying to be honest. 4. Maybe 5 on a good day. Have you had thoughts of hurting yourself? No, not seriously. Someone told me a story about standing on a bridge and I understood the impulse, but I'm not there. But you could see yourself getting there. Maybe, if things keep going the way they're going, but I'm not planning anything, if that's what you're asking. Dr. Chen made a note, the first one he'd taken. Okay, that's good. Self-awareness is important. Now tell me about Lillian. How long were you married? 8 years, together for 9. And she left when? About 2 months ago. Filed for divorce, moved out while I was at work, left a note. Papers were finalized yesterday. That must have been difficult. Did you see it coming? Adrian started to say no, then stopped himself. Because that wasn't quite true, was it? The signs had been there. The distance, the silence, the way Lillian had stopped asking questions and stopped expecting answers. He'd seen it happening, had just chosen to interpret it as her adapting to his life, instead of her slowly checking out of their marriage. I saw it, Adrian said finally. I just didn't want to believe what I was seeing meant what it meant. Which was? That she was done. That I'd pushed her too far, taken her for granted too long, and she'd reached her limit. I thought I had more time to fix it, or that it didn't need fixing because we were functioning. I was wrong. What do you think you could have done differently? Everything. I could have been home more. Could have been honest about what I do, what my business really is. Could have stopped sleeping with someone else. Could have treated her like she mattered instead of like she was just another part of my life I'd figured out and didn't need to think about anymore. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. You had an affair? Yeah, nothing serious, just a cocktail waitress I saw for a few months. Lillian probably knew, or at least suspected. I wasn't particularly careful about hiding it. Why do you think you did that? Had the affair? Adrian had asked himself that question 100 times in the past 2 months. Because it was easy. Because the waitress looked at me like I was something special, and Lillian had stopped looking at me like that. Because I'm selfish and weak, and I wanted to feel wanted, even though I had someone at home who'd wanted me for 8 years until I gave her every reason not to. That's a lot of self-judgment. It's also accurate. Maybe. But self-judgment without self-compassion usually just leads to shame spirals that don't help anyone. You made mistakes. You hurt someone you loved. That's human, Adrian. Not good, but human. The question is what you do with that understanding now. What can I do? She's in Portland, teaching art classes, building a new life. I signed the divorce papers. It's over. Is it? Or are you still carrying it around, letting it define everything you do? Adrian didn't have an answer to that. Or rather, he had an answer but didn't like what it said about him. I think about her constantly, Adrian admitted, about what I lost, what I threw away, about whether I'm capable of being different or if this is just who I am, someone who destroys good things because I don't know how to value them until they're gone. And what do you think? Are you capable of being different? I don't know. I'm 42. Most of who I am feels pretty fixed at this point, but I also can't keep being who I've been, because who I've been led to sitting alone in a shithole apartment, drinking scotch, and wondering what the point of any of this is. What is the point? For you, I mean. What gets you out of bed in the morning? Habit, mostly. The business, I guess. Though that's starting to feel more like obligation than purpose. I don't know, Dr. Chen. That's kind of why I'm here, to figure out if there's a point or if I'm just going through the motions until something stops me. They talked for another 40 minutes, covering ground that felt both familiar and foreign. His childhood, his parents who died when he was young, the choices that had led him into the kind of business where violence was a tool and loyalty was currency. Dr. Chen listened more than he spoke, asked questions that made Adrian uncomfortable in useful ways, didn't judge or offer easy solutions. At the end, Dr. Chen said, "I think you're depressed, Adrian. Not clinically, not to the point where medication is necessary, but situationally. You've lost something important, your life structure has been disrupted, and you're questioning fundamental things about who you are and what you want. That's depression, and it's treatable." With what? Therapy? Therapy helps. So does making changes. Small ones at first, then bigger ones, as you figure out what direction you want to go. So does being honest with yourself about what you want versus what you think you should want. And sometimes medication helps too, though I don't think that's where we need to start. So what do I do? You come back next week. We keep talking. You start making small decisions that align with who you want to be instead of who you've been. And you give yourself permission to not have all the answers right now, to be in process instead of already arrived. Adrian left the office feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because he'd said things out loud that had been poisoning him from the inside. Heavier because now those things were real instead of just thoughts he could ignore. His phone buzzed as he hit the street. Marcus again. "Vincent called. Wants to know if you've made a decision about his offer." It's been less than 24 hours. I told him that. He said the timeline's accelerating, that things are moving faster than he expected. He needs an answer by tomorrow. Adrian felt the familiar pressure returning, the weight of decisions that had consequences rippling outward in ways he couldn't fully predict. This was his life, constant demands, constant pressure, problems that needed solving before they became catastrophes. "Tell him I'll call him tonight," Adrian said. "I'm still thinking." "You sound different. Therapy go okay?" "It was fine. Weird, but fine. I'm supposed to go back next week, make small changes, give myself permission to be in process. Whatever that means." Sounds very California. Right? But maybe California's onto something. Maybe the rest of us are just too stubborn to admit we don't have everything figured out. "You're definitely in a weird mood. You need anything?" "No. I'm good. I'm going to walk for a while, clear my head, then I'll call Vincent and figure out what I'm saying to him." Adrian walked for hours, through neighborhoods he knew and neighborhoods he didn't, watching the city shift from afternoon to evening, the light changing from harsh to forgiving. He thought about Vincent's offer, about Ray's request, about Lillian in Portland, and whether she ever thought about him or if she'd already moved on completely. Thought about Dr. Chen's question, "What gets you out of bed in the morning?" and realized he didn't have a good answer. The business got him out of bed, but not because he cared about it, just because it demanded attention. The empire he'd built required maintenance whether he wanted to maintain it or not. But what if he stopped maintaining it? What if he took Vincent's advice from a different angle, not retiring completely, but stepping back, delegating more, making the business serve his life instead of his life serving the business? What if he actually changed instead of just thinking about changing? His phone rang. Vincent, not willing to wait for Adrian to call him. "Adrian, you have an answer for me?" "I do. I'll back Carlo when you retire. I'll make it known that going after him means dealing with me too, but I have conditions." "I'm listening. First, this alliance is temporary. 2 years, maybe 3, until Carlo's established. After that, we renegotiate based on how things have evolved. Second, I want influence in how the transition happens. I don't want to wake up one day and find out Carlo's made decisions that put me in a bad position. Third, I'm pulling back from the day-to-day operations of my own business. My guy Marcus is taking over most of that. You'll be dealing with him on anything routine." Vincent was quiet for a moment. "You're stepping back?" "I'm trying to. Turns out running an empire while falling apart isn't sustainable. So I'm going to try not falling apart for a while, see if that helps." "This is about Lillian. This is about me realizing that the life I've been living isn't the life I want to keep living. Lillian leaving just made that clear." "Fair enough. I accept your conditions. 2 years, renegotiable, with you having input on major decisions that affect your interests. Marcus runs point on daily operations. You stay available for the big picture stuff. That work?" "That works." "Good. I'll have my attorney draw up something informal, just so we both know where we stand. And Adrian, I'm glad you're making changes. Too many men in our business die before they realize they should have lived differently. Yeah, well, I'm trying not to be one of those men. Good luck with that. It's harder than it sounds. They hung up, and Adrian felt something shift. Not relief exactly, but a sense of forward motion, of decisions made and consequences accepted. He'd committed to backing Carlo, which meant he was still in the business, still part of the world he'd been questioning. But he was also creating space to step back, to let Marcus handle more, to see if there was a version of this life that didn't consume everything. He called Marcus next. I told Vincent yes, Adrian said. 2-year alliance, you're running day-to-day operations. I'm available for major decisions, but otherwise I'm pulling back. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. You're serious about this? I am. You've been ready to run things for a while now. This just makes it official. And what are you going to do with all your free time? I have no idea. Figure out who I am when I'm not putting out fires, maybe. Go to therapy. Make small changes. See if there's a point to any of this beyond accumulation and control. You really did go to therapy. I really did. And I'm going back next week, which is either growth or stupidity, probably both. Well, I support your journey of self-discovery or whatever this is. Just don't disappear completely, okay? I'm good, but I'm not run the empire alone good. Not yet. I won't disappear. I'm just going to try being present for my own life instead of living in constant crisis mode. Good. You've earned that. And boss, I'm proud of you. This takes guts admitting you need to change. Adrian felt something catch in his throat, unexpected emotion at Marcus's words. Thanks, Marcus. That means more than you know. He hung up, stood on a street corner in a neighborhood he didn't recognize, and tried to imagine what came next. Tried to picture days that weren't structured by problems, evenings that didn't end in exhaustion, a life that had space for things that weren't work. Couldn't quite manage it, but the fact that he was trying felt like progress. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown Portland number. His heart stopped for a second, thinking it might be Lillian, that somehow she'd heard about the changes he was making and wanted to reach out. But the message, when he read it, was from someone else entirely. Mr. Voss, my name is Sarah Martinez. I work at the Portland Community Center where Lillian Hart teaches. She asked me to contact you regarding some artwork she left at the penthouse, a series of paintings she'd like retrieved if possible. Could you arrange to have them shipped to this address? The message included an address in Portland, a gallery location where Lillian was apparently having a showing in 2 months. Adrian stared at the message, trying to parse what it meant. Lillian wanted her paintings, which meant she was thinking about him, at least peripherally. She was having a showing, which meant she was moving forward with her art in ways she never had when they were together. She'd had someone else contact him instead of reaching out directly, which meant the boundaries she'd set were still firm. He could ship the paintings, could have Marcus handle it, make it professional and distant, respect Lillian's clear desire for no direct contact. Or he could do something different. He typed a response. I'll bring them myself. I have business in Portland in 2 weeks. We'll leave them at the gallery with a note for Ms. Hart. Sent it before he could overthink it, then immediately regretted it, then decided regret didn't matter. The response came quickly. I'll let her know. Thank you. Adrian stood there on that street corner holding his phone, thinking about Portland and paintings and the woman who'd rather ask a stranger to contact her ex-husband than risk hearing his voice. Thinking about how you could love someone for 8 years and end up strangers. Thinking about whether bringing her paintings to Portland was a step toward closure or just another way of not letting go. He didn't have an answer, but he had 2 weeks to figure it out. 2 weeks to decide if this was healing or harm, progress or backsliding. 2 weeks to pack up the paintings Lillian had left behind and see if there was any way to give them back without reopening wounds that were just starting to scab over. The city darkened around him, streetlights coming on, the evening rush beginning. Adrian started walking again, back toward his apartment, back toward the life he was trying to rebuild into something different, back toward whatever came next, which was terrifying and necessary and the only direction left to go. 2 years later, Adrian stood in a grocery store in Portland, holding a box of cereal he didn't particularly want when he saw her. The 2 years between deciding to bring Lillian's paintings to Portland and this moment had been full of changes, some intentional, and some that just happened when you stopped holding everything so tightly. He'd gone to therapy every week for 6 months until Dr. Chen said he didn't need to anymore, then kept going anyway because it turned out talking to someone who wasn't invested in your empire was useful. He'd let Marcus run the business almost entirely, showing up only for the decisions that actually required his input, which turned out to be fewer than he'd thought. He'd backed Carlo Castellano through his first rocky year until the young wolves stopped circling and started respecting, then renegotiated their alliance into something looser, more collegial. He'd moved to Portland 8 months ago, telling himself it was for business reasons, knowing it was because Lillian was there, and even though he'd promised not to look for her, living in the same city felt like a compromise between letting go and holding on. He hadn't contacted her, hadn't shown up at the community center or the gallery where her paintings were displayed with price tags that suggested she was making it, hadn't engineered any accidental meetings or tried to force a reconciliation that she'd made clear she didn't want. He just lived in the same city, gone to therapy with a new doctor, built a quieter life that looked nothing like the empire he'd left Marcus to manage in New York, opened a small consulting firm that helped legitimate businesses with security and logistics, the kind of work that used his skills without requiring his soul, made enough money to live comfortably without needing to live large. Discovered to his surprise that he didn't miss the empire much at all, and now here she was, 2 years after he'd brought her paintings to the gallery and left them with a note that just said, "Good luck with the showing," standing 3 aisles over, comparing prices on pasta sauce, like this was a normal Tuesday, and not the collision of past and present he'd been unconsciously preparing for since he'd moved here. She looked different. Better, actually. Her hair was shorter, cut in a way that framed her face and made her look younger than she had when they were together. She was wearing jeans and a paint-stained shirt, casual in a way she'd never been in New York, where every outfit had been carefully considered for whatever social obligation she was navigating on his behalf. She looked happy, or at least not unhappy, which was more than he'd been able to give her in their 8 years together. Adrian stood there, frozen, trying to decide what to do. He could leave, slip out before she saw him, maintain the distance they'd both been preserving. He could approach her, say hello, risk making her uncomfortable in the one place she'd built a life without him. He could keep standing there like an idiot, holding cereal and staring until she noticed and called security. The decision got made for him when she looked up and saw him. Her expression went through several stages: surprise, recognition, something that might have been fear or might have been just the shock of unexpected contact. Then it settled into something neutral, careful, the look of someone who'd learned to control her reactions. "Adrian," she said, and his name and her voice after 2 years felt like a gift and a wound at the same time. "Lillian, hi." "Hi." She stood there, one hand still on a jar of marinara sauce, looking at him across the distance of 3 aisles and 2 years and all the things that had broken between them. "You live here now?" "For about 8 months. Opened a small firm, nothing like what I had in New York. Security consulting, mostly legitimate. It's boring, but it pays the bills." "And you just happen to be in this specific grocery store?" "It's 2 blocks from my apartment. I shop here every Tuesday." "I didn't know you did." She seemed to relax slightly at that, the tension in her shoulders easing. "I usually don't. Different store, different schedule, but they were out of the tomatoes I like, so I came here instead." They stood there in silence, 2 people who'd promised to love each other forever, trying to figure out how to talk like strangers who used to know everything about each other. "Your showing was beautiful," Adrian said finally. "I didn't go to the opening, didn't want to intrude, but I went a week later, saw your work. You're talented, Lillian. You always were, but this was different. Like you finally believed it." "I did. Believe it, I mean. It took leaving everything behind to figure out that I wasn't just the wife who painted sometimes. I was an artist who happened to be married." She paused. "Thank you for bringing the paintings. I know that couldn't have been easy." "It was fine. Gave me an excuse to see Portland, figure out if I could live somewhere that wasn't New York." "And can you?" "Apparently. It's quieter here, slower. People don't know who I was, what I did. I'm just Adrian Voss, security consultant, guy who shops for groceries on Tuesdays." Lillian smiled, small but genuine. "That must be strange for you, being ordinary." "It is, but it's also kind of nice. Turns out I don't mind being nobody special." She set down the marinara sauce, picked up a different brand, set that down too like she couldn't quite remember what she'd come here to buy. "Do you want to get coffee? Catch up properly? There's a place around the corner if you're not busy." Adrian's heart did something complicated in his chest. This was the moment he'd been unconsciously hoping for and consciously dreading, the chance to sit across from Lillian and talk like adults instead of wounded parties, to see if there was any way to build something new from the wreckage of what they'd been. "I'd like that," he said. The coffee shop was the kind of place Portland excelled at. Exposed brick, mismatched furniture, baristas with tattoos and strong opinions about espresso. They ordered their drinks, found a table by the window, sat down across from each other with the careful distance of people who knew exactly how close they could get without touching old wounds. "So," Lillian said, wrapping her hands around her cup like she needed something to hold. 2 years. That's a long time." "It is. You look good, Lillian. Happy." "I am happy, or I'm getting there anyway. It took a while. The first year was hard, learning to be alone, rebuilding everything from scratch. But then it got easier. I found the community center job, started teaching, met people who didn't know me as anyone's wife. Just me. I'm glad. I really am. Are you? Happy, I mean?" Adrian thought about it, trying to be honest. "I'm better than I was. I went to therapy, worked through a lot of things about why I made the choices I made. Let go of the business mostly, stopped trying to control everything. Moved here because I needed a fresh start, and this seemed like a good place for one." "And you didn't move here because I was here? I'd be lying if I said you weren't part of the calculation. But I didn't move here to win you back or anything. More like I needed to prove to myself that I could be in the same city as you and not make it about you. Does that make sense?" "Actually, yeah, it does." Lillian took a sip of her coffee, looked out the window at the Portland drizzle that was doing its perpetual thing. "I should probably tell you. I've been seeing someone. Nothing serious yet, but it's been a few months. I didn't want you to hear about it from someone else and think I was hiding it." The words hit harder than Adrian expected, even though he'd known intellectually that Lillian would move on, would find someone new, would build a life that didn't include pining for what they'd had. But knowing it and hearing it were different, and for a moment he had to work to keep his expression neutral. "I appreciate you telling me," he said once he could trust his voice. "You deserve to be happy, Lillian, with someone who can actually be present, who doesn't treat you like an accessory to their empire. You weren't always like that. In the beginning, you were present. You were there. In the beginning, I didn't have an empire to run. Once I did, everything else became secondary, including you. Especially you." Lillian was quiet for a moment. "Do you know what the worst part was? It wasn't the long hours or the danger or even the affair. It was the feeling that I'd become invisible to you, that you could look right at me and not actually see me, like I was furniture, useful, familiar, but not requiring your attention." Adrian felt the words like a physical blow, accurate and brutal. "I'm sorry. I know I said that before, in the note I left with the paintings. But I need to say it to your face. I'm sorry for making you invisible. I'm sorry for treating our marriage like something I'd already won and didn't need to work for. I'm sorry for being so consumed with power that I lost the only thing that actually mattered. I appreciate that, I do. But Adrian, you have to understand. I didn't leave because I was angry. I left because staying was killing me. Every day I woke up in that penthouse, it was like I was disappearing a little more. And I realized that if I stayed, eventually there'd be nothing left of me at all. I'd just be the wife, the accessory, the woman who used to paint before she decided her husband's empire was more important. I never asked you to stop painting. You didn't have to ask. Your life left no room for my art. Every time I tried to work on something, there was a dinner to attend or a function to appear at or some crisis that needed managing. And I went along with it because I loved you and I wanted to support you. But I lost myself in the process." Adrian swallowed hard, tasting regret and recognition. "Did you ever love me? Really love me, I mean? Or was I just a mistake you made when you were young?" Lillian's eyes softened. "I loved you so much it scared me. That was the problem. I loved you enough to lose myself, and by the time I realized what was happening, I didn't know how to find my way back while still being your wife. So I had to choose, me or us, and I chose me. I'm glad you did. Not glad we're divorced, but glad you chose yourself. You deserved better than what I gave you. We both deserve better. Better communication, better boundaries, better versions of ourselves. But we were young and stupid and we thought love was enough. Turns out it's not. Love is just the starting point. Everything after requires work we didn't know how to do." They sat in silence for a while, drinking their coffee, watching the rain. Two people who'd shared 8 years trying to figure out what, if anything, they shared now. "Can I ask you something?" Lillian said finally. "Why did you really move to Portland? And don't give me the line about fresh starts. I want the actual reason." Adrian set down his cup, met her eyes, decided that honesty was the only currency that mattered anymore. "Because I couldn't let go completely, but I also couldn't keep holding on the way I was. Moving here felt like a compromise. I could be in the same city, know you were okay, without inserting myself into your life. It was selfish and probably unhealthy, but it was the best I could do. And now that you know I'm seeing someone, that I've moved on, what are you going to do? I don't know. Stay, probably. I've built something here, small as it is. I like my therapist. I like the quiet. I like being someone who shops for groceries and goes to the farmer's market and doesn't have people afraid of him. You were never as scary as you thought you were. I was to some people, to the people who worked for me, the people I competed against. Maybe even to you sometimes. Not scared, worried, maybe. Worried about what you were becoming, what the business was doing to you, but never scared." Adrian felt something ease in his chest, a knot he'd been carrying for 2 years loosening slightly. "That matters. More than you know. Adrian, I need you to understand something. I don't hate you. I'm not angry anymore. I've forgiven you for the affair, for the neglect, for all of it. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean we can go back or start over or try again. I know. Do you? Because I need to make sure you're not staying in Portland thinking that eventually I'll change my mind, that we'll run into each other enough times that old feelings will resurface and we'll give it another shot. That's not going to happen. I've moved on. I'm building a life without you, and it's a good life. I need you to be okay with that." Adrian took a breath, feeling the finality of her words, the door closing that he'd been keeping propped open in his mind. "I am okay with it. Or I will be. I don't want to disrupt your life, Lillian. I just want to be in the same city and know you're happy. That's all. And you're okay with running into me sometimes? At the grocery store or the farmer's market or wherever. It won't be too painful? It'll be painful, but I'll survive. I've survived worse." Lillian smiled sadly. "Yeah, I guess we both have." They finished their coffee, talked about safer things, her upcoming gallery showing, his consulting work, the differences between Portland and New York. Surface conversation, the kind that people who used to know each other intimately engage in when the intimacy is gone but the fondness remains. When they stood to leave, Lillian hesitated. "This was good, seeing you, talking like adults. Maybe we can do it again sometime. Not regularly, but occasionally. If we're going to live in the same city, it seems better to be friendly than to avoid each other." "I'd like that." They walked out together, stood under the awning while the rain continued its gentle assault. Lillian pulled up her hood, preparing to run to her car. "Take care of yourself, Adrian," she said, and the words echoed the last line of the note she'd left 2 years ago. But this time they sounded different. Not like goodbye, but like genuine care from someone who'd once loved him and now just wanted him to be okay. "You too, Lillian." She walked away, disappearing into the rain, and Adrian stood there watching her go for the second time in 2 years. But this time felt different. This time he wasn't losing her. She was already lost, already gone, already building a life he wasn't part of. This time was just accepting what had been true all along. He walked back to his apartment through the rain, getting soaked because he didn't care enough to rush. Let himself in. Made tea because that's what you did in Portland, apparently. Sat by his window that looked out onto actual trees instead of brick walls. His phone rang. Marcus checking in like he did every week. "How's Portland?" Marcus asked. "Wet. I just ran into Lillian at the grocery store." "Shit, how'd that go?" "Better than I expected. We had coffee, talked like adults. She's seen someone. She's happy." "And how are you with that?" "Sad. But okay. It's the right thing, you know. She deserves to be happy, and she wasn't happy with me. So this is good, even if it hurts." "That's very mature of you. I'm not sure I'd handle it as well." "I'm not handling it well. I'm handling it adequately while falling apart in private, which is different." Marcus laughed. "Still doing therapy?" "Once a month now. Maintenance sessions, my doctor calls them. Making sure I don't backslide into old patterns." "Good. Because I need you to stay functional. The The business is doing well, but there are still decisions that require your input. Carlo's been asking about expanding into new territories, and I told him I'd run it by you first. Adrian listened as Marcus ran through the various business items that needed his attention, and he felt the familiar pull, the empire calling, demanding he return to what he'd been, step back into the role of Adrian Voss, the crime boss, instead of Adrian Voss, the guy who drank tea and went to therapy. Tell Carlo I'll think about it, Adrian said. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. I'm not coming back. Not full-time, maybe not ever. Whatever decisions I make about the business, I'm making them from here, from this life. The empire can keep running, but it's yours now. I'm just a consultant. I get it. And honestly, it's working. You being removed gives me authority I wouldn't have if you were still in New York micromanaging everything. We're good, Adrian. The business is good. You don't need to worry. That's the thing, though. I don't worry. I used to worry constantly. About the business, about rivals, about cops and feds, and all the things that could go wrong. Now, I mostly worry about whether I'm going to remember to buy milk before the store closes. It's such a smaller life, Marcus. But it's mine. Then keep it. You've earned it. They hung up, and Adrian sat there as evening turned to night, the rain continuing its endless meditation. He thought about Lillian and the man she was seeing, wondered if he treated her well, if he saw her instead of looking through her, if he made space for her art instead of consuming all the air in the room. Hoped he did. Hoped Lillian had found someone who could give her what Adrian never could. Presence, attention, the kind of love that made you bigger instead of smaller. The weeks passed into months, and Adrian built routines that didn't involve crisis or empire. He went to the gym 3 mornings a week, worked with clients who had legitimate businesses and legitimate problems, had dinner with colleagues who didn't carry guns or have bodies buried in their past. He ran into Lillian twice more, once at a bookstore, once at a park, where they were both walking alone. Each time they talked briefly, friendly, but distant, 2 people learning to be in each other's orbit without colliding. He dated occasionally women he met through normal channels instead of through the business. It never went anywhere serious. He wasn't ready. They weren't right. The timing was off. But it was practice, learning to be with someone without trying to control them, without making them an extension of his empire. He learned to cook, badly at first, and then with increasing competence. Started running, not because he enjoyed it, but because therapy had taught him that physical movement helped mental processing. Read books for pleasure instead of just for information. Took a pottery class at the community center where Lillian taught, though he made sure to go on days she wasn't there, giving her space while still occupying the same general world. The pottery was terrible. Lopsided bowls and mugs that leaked, but it was his, made with his hands instead of bought with money he'd earned through violence and calculation. 1 year after the grocery store meeting, Adrian was finishing a session with his Portland therapist, a woman named Dr. Reynolds, who specialized in helping people rebuild their lives after trauma, when she asked him the question that had become their regular check-in. "Are you happy, Adrian?" He thought about it, really thought, instead of giving the easy answer. "I'm not unhappy. That's not the same thing as happy, but it's better than I was. I've stopped measuring my life by what I've lost and started measuring it by what I've built. It's small, what I've built, but it's mine, and it's clean, and it doesn't require anyone else to suffer for me to have it." That sounds like progress. It is. But I think I'm always going to carry Lillian with me, not in a way that stops me from moving forward, but in a way that reminds me what matters. She taught me that you can love someone and still lose them if you're not careful. That power doesn't protect you from loneliness. That you can have everything and still have nothing if you're not paying attention to what actually matters. And what actually matters? Being seen. Seeing other people. Showing up for your own life instead of just managing it from a distance. Pretty basic stuff, really, but I had to lose everything to figure it out. Dr. Reynolds smiled. That's often how it works. We don't learn the easy lessons until we've exhausted all the hard ways first. Adrian left therapy, drove through Portland's afternoon traffic, stopped at the grocery store, the same one where he'd seen Lillian that first time. Picked up milk and bread and the ingredients for a stir-fry he was planning to make for dinner. Stood in the checkout line behind a young couple arguing playfully about whether they needed ice cream, and felt a pang of something that wasn't quite envy, but was close. That could have been him and Lillian in some other timeline where he'd made different choices, where he'd valued presence over power, connection over control, where he'd learned earlier what it had taken losing her to understand. But this was the timeline he had. And in this one, he was alone in a checkout line in Portland, buying groceries for a dinner he'd eat by himself while reading a book about people who didn't exist. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was honest, and after 44 years of lying to himself and everyone around him, honest felt like enough. He paid for his groceries, drove home, cooked his stir-fry while listening to jazz on the radio, ate at his small table with the view of trees, read his book until his eyes got tired, went to bed at a reasonable hour in sheets that were clean and a space that was his. And somewhere across the city, Lillian was doing the same, eating dinner, maybe with the man she was seeing, maybe alone, living a life that had started the moment she'd decided she was worth more than what Adrian could give her. They were both better for the separation, both freer, both building lives that fit who they actually were instead of who they'd been pretending to be. It wasn't the ending Adrian would have chosen 2 years ago, but it was the ending they both needed, the one that let them become people instead of just roles in each other's stories. And maybe that was the real lesson, that some losses aren't tragedies but corrections, painful adjustments that push you toward who you're supposed to become. That love isn't enough if you're not ready to do the work, make the space, show up completely instead of just partially. That power can't fill the hole where connection should be. That empires are cold comfort when you're alone at 3 a.m. That all the money and control and fear you can generate won't bring back the one person who actually mattered. Adrian Voss had learned it the hardest way possible, by losing everything and having to build something new from the wreckage. He'd learned that change was possible, but not easy, that you could be 42 and completely lost and somehow still find a way forward. That therapy worked if you let it, that small lives could be more meaningful than large ones, that being nobody special was its own kind of freedom. He'd learned that some doors close forever, and the only healthy response is to stop standing outside them waiting for them to reopen. Lillian's door was closed, would stay closed, and after 2 years of grief and therapy and slowly rebuilding himself into someone who didn't need an empire to feel valuable, Adrian could finally accept that. She was happy. He was better. They were both moving forward, just not together. And in a city that rained more than it should, in a life that was smaller than he'd ever imagined he'd accept, Adrian Voss discovered that better was sometimes the best you could hope for. It wasn't the ending he'd wanted, but it was the ending that let him keep living, keep trying, keep becoming something other than what he'd been. And for a man who'd spent 42 years being Adrian Voss, crime boss, that was enough. It had to be. Because the alternative was standing on bridges looking at water. And he'd promised himself, promised Dr. Chen, promised Marcus, promised the memory of who he'd been when Lillian first loved him, that he wouldn't go there. So he kept going, small steps, small victories, small moments of peace in between the memories. Kept building a life worth living, even if it looked nothing like the one he'd planned. Kept showing up for therapy, for groceries, for the mundane miracle of days that didn't end in crisis. Kept being Adrian Voss, whoever that was now, whoever he was becoming. It wasn't perfect. It was barely even good some days. But it was his, earned through loss and built from honesty, and that made it valuable in ways the empire never was. The rain kept falling. The city kept living. Lillian kept painting, kept teaching, kept building a life that didn't include him. And Adrian kept breathing, kept trying, kept learning that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is let them go completely, even when it costs you everything, especially then.